study session of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:00 p.m. on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023 in room 137 of the Ensign Building. The board acknowledges this site and all RTS sites are situated on the ancestral land of the Dakota people, and we honor the Dakota nations and the sacred land of all Indigenous peoples. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be posted on youtube.com/ISD535 following completion of the meeting. The agenda and documents for this meeting are available online at rochesterschools.org/assembly. Present at this meeting are school board members, Superintendent Ken Pickell, a non-voting ex officio member, and Assistant School Board Clerk, Ms. Lori Sam. Ms. Sam, would you please call the roll?
Director Barlow.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Murphy.
Here.
Director McLaughlin. Here. Director Martin. Here. Chair Nathan.
Here.
Vice Chair Workman.
Here.
At this time, I have the opportunity to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2.1 is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Our first item tonight is a focused topic, which is an information item, the process for identifying students for special education services. Superintendent Pickell.
Thank you, Chair Nathan. This subject was requested by one of our board members, which we are always glad when board members share something that you would like to put us on the calendar. It's important to say, as we turn it over to Dr. Bamu and her team, that this is an update on our current practices and our current status, and that some of the initiatives that are part of our strategic plan, as well as recent changes in legislation and other things, will be changing practice as we move forward. I know board members took note of, as did I, that when we had our presentation from the University of Minnesota and Jill Dunn on multi-tiered systems of support, we noticed that the child count for students with disabilities or students who receive special education services in Rochester Public Schools, while having trended historically somewhat below the state for the previous 3 or 4 years, in the 21-22 school year increased from 16.4% to 17.9%, moving beyond the identification rate in the state. Now that's 1 year's data, and it could be a different student population moving into the district, but it really highlights that's a pretty striking increase, and we don't know where we are exactly this year. Some of the colleagues may be looking at it. But it just underscores our need to be continually vigilant on our identification of students for the amazing services that we have in this district. And so today we want to focus on how we do identify those students. There are many things in the strategic plan that I think connect to this discussion, in particular that conversation about multi-tiered systems of support. Ensuring that most kids can get their needs met in that tier 1, where they're in the classroom with solid curriculum instruction, or that tier 2 where they need supplemental supports. And then we're making sure that when we do identify a student as having a disability, we're very sure that that in fact is the case, and then we're providing the kind of great services that we've historically provided for them. So we're focusing on that front door to our special education services today. I want to thank FA and the team for putting together this overview, and we want to make sure that we have board members feeling very empowered and encouraged to jump in with questions as we go. Because as you probably saw, if you look at the PowerPoint assembly, there's a lot of text, there's a lot of rich information. We aren't going to touch on every piece of that in the presentation, but we invite you to stop us and probe deeply if there's some of the things in there that you are interested in. So thank you again, and let's jump in.
Okay, good evening, Chair of the Board, Directors of the Board, Dr. Pickell. It's with great pleasure that I introduce you to these fantastic colleagues of mine. Right to my immediate right is the Director of Student Services, Colin Greenstrom, and next is Nicole Newman, Director of Special Ed Secondary, and of course the last but by no means the least, It's Marisa Singh, she's the director of ECSE and elementary education. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Obama. Thank you, Mr. Patel. Thank you, Chair, for the board for us having us here. We're so happy to be here to talk about this passionate topic for the rest of us. Obviously, the three of us, it's been our life's work, and we're happy to share some of this, some of these exciting maybe updates. Some things are updated and some things reflect, as Dr. Patel said, our current practices. We're going to go remind you about in the slides table of contents. Want to look at certain place maybe?
Usually the same. Well, usually up there.
Is it,
The consequences.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, you'll see the table of contents is here. You probably likely already reviewed that. We're going to go through, there are several slides that are a bit wordy, but we are not going to read them for you. We've already done that. We're happy to elaborate on any questions that you have as we go. And then knowing that, as Dr. Patel just said, our presentation is a reflection of current practices. You have all attended a meeting on June 13th where this was reviewed in depth. And so just reminding you that the referrals for tiered interventions versus special education referrals are an expectation of full implementation of MTSS, along with a significant change in our current processes that would be expected to be reflecting the overall percentages of children who qualify for special education decreasing. I am going to read this slide too because I think it's powerful and it comes out of federal law in the idea that the purpose of special education is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And we are going to touch on all of that here tonight. I'm not going to, I'll go through, I think that this may be a slide that you hadn't yet seen prior to this last week, but just reminding you of the student problem solving process that is evident in the strong MTSS system that we will be implementing. When we're identifying students, we would start at number 1 and identifying the instructional needs that a student has, and then utilizing this problem solving process that's explained through steps 1 through 4. We start with identifying that problem, we address it and determine the root cause of the problem through deep analysis of a team, and from there we develop and implement the interventions that would be designed and matched to meet the student's need. Through plan evaluation, then the teams may find that some students are making more than adequate progress, and maybe they even met grade level expectations. And in these cases, teams will consider how to fade an intervention for a student who has experienced success, or whether to continue that intervention for a student who is making that adequate progress, but not yet meeting grade level expectations. If a student does not make adequate progress over an extended period, given numerous attempts to intensify the intervention, then problem-solving teams will recommend or may recommend that a student be evaluated for special education disability. While it is very structurally similar to the problem-solving process, a special education evaluation is far more in-depth, still problem-solving in a deep and individualized way. You're going to see on the next slide just what Dr. Patel mentioned. First is that universal instruction is that green bar, and this is a visual of what layered support looks like. All students get universal core instruction. So as we add supports, we are layering the supports, not replacing them. The next visual just, again, lands on tier 1, 2, and 3 with an additional explanation, but the big differences between tiers 2 and 3 supports from the universal support is that students are not meeting benchmarks at grade level. Tier 3 is when we're talking about significant discrepancy from grade level expectations. Even, it must be a year or more discrepancy even. And once we have ensured that we have provided high quality instruction, then we can have the conversation about whether the continued ongoing need is due to a disability.
So I'll go ahead and get started in the referral process. A referral to the child study team can come from a teacher or a parent. And the first thing that is gathered in that process is information regarding concerns, data, and any other relevant information regarding the student and their needs. The team also at that time will review any pre-referral interventions and data that were collected, as Connie talked about in her slides. When considering identification for a student for special education in the state of Minnesota, a student can be eligible beginning at birth, and this past spring, new legislation was revised for eligibility that now allows students to continue to be eligible through the day prior to their 22nd birthday. We serve students in the public school, the non-public school, and homeschool students as well.
Nicole, can I ask a simple question, just try and practice what I preach? Is a child study team in a school a standing team that's always there and considers the needs of any student that's referred, or a team that's convened for each individual student to look at that student's needs? Just a simple definition of a child study team.
Yes, so the child studies team would be separate than your pre-referral or your MTSS team in the sense that it's a standing team. Usually this team is heavily comprised of our special educators, because by the time that a student makes it to child study, they have worked through that pre-referral process, and we're planning now for evaluation to consider special education.
So this, I should probably say it's board members on County, I didn't know that, but that would make sure.
Yeah.
So this is a special skill team that is really versed in best practice and in the issues that need to be examined.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically run by school psychologists who's implementing those evaluation components, which is actually my next slide.
Great, thank you.
So a comprehensive evaluation, or a special education evaluation, is a comprehensive evaluation. And this will consist of different areas to evaluate depending on the educational disability that the team is considering for that particular student. And areas that must be included in that evaluation are a review of current records, medical history, systematic observation in the student setting, and then it could include possible cognitive, academic, social, emotional, and developmental functioning. Once the school team does receive parent permission to proceed with the evaluation, the comprehensive evaluation will be completed within 30 school days. So on this slide, you will see all of the eligibility categories that we have in the state of Minnesota, and the possible eligibility categories are these 13, and a student can qualify for one or more of these particular disabilities in Minnesota. Once a student does qualify in a disability area on that comprehensive initial eval, an IEP team will gather to discuss programming. And the team that has to gather has to consist of a parent, a general education teacher, administrator, special education teacher, and then a student when appropriate.
So we talk about a development of an IEP, but it's also important to note that we also have developments of an IFSP for our students that qualify with disabilities for up until their 3rd birthday, which stands for Family Service Plan. Both have the same components, and it's a collaborative approach. So this team, the role of the team is to come together and talk about those present levels the student has, to really talk about the student's strengths, because we know that when creating a plan, we also have to have that strengths-based approach as well as understanding their needs. The team will create goals with services and related services if they qualify for those. And then also we not only talk about those services, but also what modifications are needed during our school day, as well as in the extracurricular or other non-academic activities as well. The team also determines that least restrictive educational setting. How are we serving students with disabilities with their non-disabled peers, and how are we getting them every opportunity that we can in that core instruction? We also address transition services starting their freshman year. And then we also determine how we are working on that progress and how to report that progress back to families, how we include the gen ed teacher and those components in there, as well as how we involve educational support professionals or paraprofessionals in the programming. The really important key component about initial IEP services is that we do not begin special education services without the written consent for those initial provision services. So here is what Dr. Patel had referenced earlier in terms of our child health numbers and where we are. This is broken down in terms of percentage of how students in Rochester Public Schools qualify for those areas of disabilities. And this really does reflect our diverse learner needs as well, and the students that we serve. We have a variety of programs that we're really proud of because we can serve students with more significant disability in a variety of programs throughout RPS, which isn't always capable for some of our other districts. We're really proud of the population that we serve.
Excuse me, before you move on, since you've been given the opportunity to inquire, and you happen to be covering this, Melissa, so I'm going to ask you this question. First of all, thank you for including the child count. You know, sometimes we maybe just hear about the number of students we have identified, and so I found it quite interesting. Can you, for those who may not work in the field, can you perhaps provide an example of the highest category, someone with a student with a specific learning disability, and what services might be provided to that particular student with that particular disability?
You know, it depends on how the student qualifies for a significant learning disability in terms of that educational criteria. We did embed a lot of links in here too for all of that criteria. But if we take a look at someone that may have a need in, let's say, math, then we include that general education teacher in that process to say, how are they doing on those standards? We look at the needs and what information came out of that evaluation report, exactly what part of the process are they needing extra educational services in, and then we build that programming based off of that. So we do have a variety of different programs that can meet the needs of students, because even though you have a specific learning disability, you can also show needs in the area of social emotional, the areas of social emotional, so we can build programming with those related service providers. So even though it might be a primary need in math, that student could also have speech articulation needs. They could have needs of a counselor or social worker. Counselor would be that gen ed side, of social worker could be added into that IEP as well.
And then related to child count, I sometimes hear, well, boys are referred more often than girls, or a particular ethnic group is referred more than others. Have you guys been able to develop any sense of that, or do you have any care to offer a comment, or I mean, you don't have to, I'm just kind of curious, because I'm sometimes asked that, and I just kind of shrug my shoulders and say,
That's really interesting that you asked that, because last year Nicole and I had an opportunity to participate in the meeting. And that was one of the projects that we did, is that we broke down every disability area by ethnicity. And so to look at that, it didn't have to bring that data along with, but we easily can break that down. Because that really is the role to determine where we will break identifying, and then as a system, how do we work through the MTSS system to make sure that we're not over or even under identifying in all of those areas. And we did see some discrepancy within that when we broke that down.
And MPA is going to serve as well.
Sorry. Yes, thank you.
thank you.
I'm interested.
Going back to the referral step, so I gathered that a referral could be initiated by a parent or by a teacher after, and it sounded like the referral from the teacher would typically be after there was some interventions in place already and not achieving grade level. I think Connie said for 1 year. Did I remember that right?
That was in terms of where you would fall in terms of the tiered supports for MTSS, that if you're entering a tier 2 or tier 3, you are demonstrating more than, if you're entering tier 3, it's more than a year of not matching grade level expectations.
Oh, how you get to tier, okay, all
Correct.
right. Okay.
Tier 3, not special education specifically, but that was what you, the team, the problem solving team would consider. How long have we been doing this? Have we provided the right amount of supports, intensity of supports? Are we still making progress? Or do we believe that the underlying cause for the lack of adequate progress is due to a student's disability that we haven't yet addressed?
And so what about for our students that are not enrolled in the RPS school district?
Sure.
How I mean, I can appreciate that a parent could initiate a request for evaluations, but in practice, what do we see? Where do those referrals come from?
In reference with our non-public partners, for example.
Yes.
We have relationships with our non-public schools, and so they, every year there's a meeting in the spring, and Connie attends that, and so we talk about the referral process. So each of their buildings know, they're all connected to a certain site, and so they know who then to reach out to, so they will actually reach out to that particular building and their child study team to make a referral for a student at their site.
And what about for one school?
We generally contact their neighborhood school.
Or us.
Or us, yeah.
Us next will get into.
Or we would connect them. If we're reached out to, we would connect them back to their neighborhood school with prepared to provide the evaluation.
Okay, so then, and sorry, I just have a couple more follow-ups. So then once we've got the referral to the child study team, right, and this student and all of their information goes to that team, and there's a school psychologist, and there's people that are making an assessment to try to identify a basis for the services. Well, so specifically for a student that qualifies for emotional or behavioral disability, what is the criteria that team is looking for? I can intuit a little bit for some of these other criteria, but like, how is that assessed? What is it measured against?
Go ahead.
So each one of those eligibility categories have a specific area or specific criteria that have to be met. So for example, under emotional behavioral, you have to do 2 systematic observations. One has to be in the school setting. You don't have to have any kind of cognitive measures for the emotional behavioral, but you have to have you have to have a functional behavioral assessment. You have to show on a standardized assessment whether or not the student shows a discrepancy in needs. So there's lots of times in the criteria it will say can either be A or B. So it allows for variety depending on the individual student. So I don't know all of the exact points for each of the disabilities, but I think that in our link on this, it will take you to MDE eligibility, and you can see each of the criteria.
That's a good question, because we also are getting parent input on that criteria. So specifically for emotional behavioral disabilities, we're taking a look across different settings. So we want to make sure, parent, how are you seeing? Are you seeing this in different settings? If you go out in the community, are you seeing it at home? Or are we just seeing it in a certain pocket? And then like Nicole said, we're ruling out those other disabilities too. Are you frustrated when a book is put in front of you? Or do we see this across multiple areas of school and not just during one certain subject?
So it doesn't require like German explosive disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. It can just be that they're struggling in the classroom with engaging in whatever it is, the task.
Yeah, we have to use that Minnesota eligibility criterion. So for all of those different categories, that's what the team will use. So every single one of those has all of the specific criteria, whether it has a standard deviation that's associated with it or a standard score, all of that has it for each different disability category.
Other health disabilities is the only category that would require a formal diagnosis from a provider. but the rest of them are all the educational components. So you could actually have a provider diagnosis and not show a need in the educational setting under a disability category.
And I think we see them the most in, for autism spectrum disorder, that they get that diagnosis from their doctor and then come to the school. We can review records and see if it applies to the criteria, but it's not an automatic needs criteria for being a student with disability in the school setting.
I'm still on a roll here in terms of trying to understand the eligibility categories. Dyslexia is, I understand, it used to be a term that was pretty much about visual processing issues. And now it seems to me that the meaning of dyslexia has changed. I mean, there are organizations that said every child needs to be tested for dyslexia. What does it mean now? What does it mean to have dyslexia?
When we take a look at dyslexia in terms of special education, there's that, the way that we can look at it in general education, is that we know that not all students with dyslexia mean that they have a specific learning disability, but some do. So some are going to require those tiered systems of support that we have in place, and that they can start to close that gap. Some are going to need even more specific services, where they're going to need that extra scoop of support. So they're going to stay in for their tiered intervention, and then they also will need that service from a special education teacher as well.
But is it some kind of that way you process things visual, like seeing things backwards, sort of?
We know that they need a systematic approach and a multi-sensory approach to learning to read. Yes. That explicit instruction. Whether it's from general education, a reading specialist, or a special education. That's how we do that.
Melissa, you mentioned from the IEP step that no services are provided until you get written parental consent for the initial IEP. But when I look at the student problem solving process, at the point to which there's a you're starting to look at individual students' issues, and you're trying to determine what the appropriate tiered support is, even before you get into the referral process. At what point are parents informed, and can the parents stop that process of even if they can stop the services, but can they stop the process of even evaluation?
Yes, a parent, and they don't need to put it in writing. If a parent says we are stopping services, whether it's after the initial signature of the eval, we stop the evaluation. If they've given written permission to start an IEP and verbally they just say we're done, that's stopped services. And you're asking about intervention as well.
I'm talking about the MTSS tiers as well. Is that also?
Is that also subject to parental approval? No, not necessarily. We don't, a parent can't just say, I don't want my kid in this reading level because I don't think that's their reading level. That's a place where their professional judgment that comes in. We obviously take parental and other caregiver perception incredibly seriously. But no, special education is different than those tiered interventions of MTSS, where there's a much more clearly defined trigger for parental approval. That's not, again, to say that we wouldn't take a parent's perception of their student's reading level or their ability in math seriously, but that is not at all like what Melissa just described, like, I want my kid out of that class. That would be a dialogue.
I don't know, are you? I'll wait until you're through. Okay. Because I'm not seeing my picture. I think so we mentioned this just briefly, but there are four main ways that students may no longer receive services. As we just discussed, a parent can say, that's it, no more. We can determine that a student is no longer eligible for services, so we're seeing that really great progress. We completed evaluation, they no longer have needs that require an IEP. The student graduate, or like Nicole said earlier, they may age out the day before their 22nd birthday for students that require those additional services.
So Melissa, if a parent were to say, revoke their previous consent,
Yes.
The school is still aware of a student's particular need. how do we respond in those instances? The services aren't withdrawn, or are they? I don't want to make a statement and not necessarily know how the process flows, but
So if the student revokes consent and says, we no longer want our students served at an IEP, we no longer give permission, all of the services that are outlined in an IEP they stop immediately. So if you're asking though, we know that our child still has needs in that area, the classroom teacher carries with everything that they know about modifications, right, and how to relate to that student, but the services do cease.
so, and I appreciate that, just to know that it's not like the students just left to fend on their own.
Yeah.
Classroom teachers still providing to their best of ability in those domains that the need makes sense.
I'd like to add in that we do several steps before we work with the family to try to talk with them about the pros and cons about revoking consent to be able to support their child. We also offer another evaluation to show whether there's continuing need. So we do a lot of steps prior to that component before the parents actually signing to revoke consent. So there's lots of discussion and dialogue prior to them just saying, no, I don't want service, so that we can prepare them for what does that look like. If your student's getting multiple hours of support and then you revoke consent and they're not prepared to now go into a different schedule, that can be really traumatizing and detrimental to the student. And we have to be able to prepare the family for that.
The next, we put a link in there for the procedural safeguards because it's also important for parents to know and understand their due process rights. And so that's included. We give procedural safeguards upon initial referral or that parent requests for evaluation, and it is also given annually at the IEP team meeting. So, and we talked about the process to begin initial services. We have different procedural safeguards. We talked about Part C, which is at birth through age 2, and then we also have Part B services, which is age 3 through age 21. That is our presentation. Thank you for allowing us to come and to talk about special education. We are passionate about the services that we provide for students with disabilities. We are really proud of our students and our staff and our administration with all the programs. We are lucky in Rochester to have the continuum of services that we have to provide the best education for all our students. Yes.
So I have a question that has a lot of different components to it, so if you can bear with me.
Okay.
So the first one is, I understand that a 504 plan is not part of special education. Where does it claim it? I mean, who's responsible for it? Who keeps track of those plans and makes sure that they are followed?
If you could just describe what it is, first of all, if nobody knows that.
Okay. So 504 plans are basically a plan that allows students access to their free and appropriate public education. So it's for any student that qualifies for a qualifying disability that has a major limitation. And there's lots of different ways under the Disability Act to be able to qualify for the 504. So that is a singleton plan. There's a whole evaluation process for 504 as well we have to go through, and then there's a plan that's written, again, to provide access. The difference between a 504 and an IEP is that specially designed instruction. So when we think about 504, again, it's just that access to the accommodations that are written in. That is actually, those are managed at the site level. Typically, it's usually from the Student Services Department, that would include the counseling department, so that is managed, and we check in with families every year to see if there's any new accommodations that need to be added as well.
So then my second question that is somewhat related to it is, I also know that twice exceptional kids who are more, what's the word you're supposed to use, accelerated?
Accelerated or advanced, TBD, not gifted and talented.
Okay, so the students who are not gifted and talented may also have another disability that might not even fall into the special education spectrum, but still be hindering their education. So I'm thinking of a student who is maybe, can I say very bright? Is that allowed? A student who is very bright might have, and I'll use this example, might have ADD without the H. So it might not be obviously apparent that they have a disability. They're doing average work, but are capable of doing so much more. So what kind of process is open to the parent who says, I know my child could be doing better, but I don't know why they aren't? How would you direct that parent? Like I said, it was a complicated question.
Yeah, so, we absolutely would work with that family and look at evaluating. When we are looking at that comprehensive evaluation, it's not just looking at where we think the student should be functioning. So when I named out those several areas where we look at how the student is doing as a whole child, that would include that. So if the student has historically functioned at a certain level and now all of a sudden has a new factor that is causing the student to function different, and we look at that historical perspective for that student. So all of that would be considered, but we would not evaluate a student because we think that the student is just doing okay. We want to make sure that we are truly making sure that we're following child find, which is making sure that we are finding the students that have a need for special education.
So I suppose there could be some conflict maybe in, is the student just doing normal average work, you know?
Sure.
And doing fine is maybe at grade level here. There could be a here.
One of the things that criteria has us address is how does their disability, if it's medical, impact them educationally? So we have to see some type of an impact, maybe a social impact, it might be an academic impact, but that's where those individual teams have to say, okay, even though they're grade advanced in their work, how are these concerns, what does that mean at the individual student level?
At the end of every one of our evaluations, the last question that's asked is, what is the adverse educational impact that the student has? And that's really the bottom line, and that's what kind of what he said is, when a student has a medical diagnosis and they may not qualify educationally, it's because they don't have an adverse educational impact. And so it's really looking at that whole child and saying, is their education being adversely impacted by what we just gathered?
You know, I guess I hope that some of these students with twice exceptional, particularly, can be diagnosed at an earlier age. In my experience in teaching high school, I had students who they know that they have a problem with attention, but their parents think that that's a really terrible thing. They don't want them to be labeled, and then that student goes on to college and really struggles. You know, they've been able to get by in high school because of their intellectual capabilities, but then when he wants to label, they fall apart. So, you know, I'm just delighted with what you all are doing in this one. I understand it's extremely complicated.
There is no right answer to the question I'm going to pose. I want to invite you individually just to share your candid thoughts with me and with the board, and we've talked a bit about this. Do you have some hypotheses or ideas as to why we have seen a significant increase in our special education student count in the last couple of years? And I say that not at all suggesting that shouldn't have gone up, because if we have more students with disabilities, we should be identifying them. And yet we know that it's quite a significant increase. In fact, even the number that you had here was higher than the one that was in the carrier report. So as we revised it from fall to December, again, I am not saying this to say, get those numbers down. You've already powerfully, Connie, you said, when we get an MTSS framework fully in place, evidence from practice elsewhere suggests we'll see that go down. Do you have some thoughts about that? You also have seen places in communities where certain populations of students and families move in greater numbers. That's, there's not going to be one right answer, but for you as the leaders of this work, are there some things that you're thinking about? And I also just want to say, if the answer is we don't know, that actually is a valid answer. We need to probe it, because it is a pretty significant increase, and I know you're all very aware of that.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, not looking for the right answer.
Right, well, I think that we have to start with our early intervention services and how we have seen our birth through age 5 up until kindergarten. Those services were required or mandated for child find in those areas. And we are seeing, that's why we have 2 beautiful early childhood programs. One of my notes on the Hoover Early Learning is because we've seen a steady increase in our early identification there. Not only are they coming in with what we call a federal setting on a little bit of service, we've also seen incoming kinders that require a greater amount of service because of our child find. That might be students that are in our social communication or our autism programs. And those programs will also provide services for students with profound disabilities as well. So that's, I think, where it starts, because we are seeing an increase in that early intervention. Anybody else want to?
At the secondary, I can share that over the past year and a half, to back up, a number of years ago, we did lose a fair amount of students with disabilities to some other educational entities in Rochester. And over the past year and a half, a number of those students returned back due to some changes in their system. And because those entities were highly enrollment of students with disabilities and secondary age, I saw a very big increase over the past 18 months in students from that particular entity. So I do believe that that's part of the secondary issue.
And for me, I would just add on to this is that a stronger MTSS system means that we are systematically putting interventions in place to match student need and providing resources to staff, our general education staff, to be able to implement those interventions with fidelity. And so that's something we've been trying to do for a long time, and kind of start and stop and start and stop. And now we have a plan where we can systematically begin to address that. And that is the number one, a big thing that we hear all the time from special education staff. They need help and we don't disagree. And they're meeting criteria and we don't disagree. But we also don't have all of those systematic interventions in place. So we want to get ahead of it, because once you qualify and you've met criteria, you've met criteria. And so it's our obligation to serve at that point. And so we're hoping that MTSS will help us with that. And then the last point, I think, is that we have this wonderful Mayo Clinic in our community. And we have families who move here for medical intervention, for supported housing, for resources they can't get anywhere else, and they're bringing their children who have many times some pretty significant disabilities, and it's our obligation to serve and support them. And so we're drawn that way, and we are happy to do that. We're supportive of that relationship, but those are children that come to our community on purpose. And so we're glad that we have a school district that also supports their need for special education services.
So, going back to the MTSS framework, age workflow, we're already talking about it really, but the presentation that we got a couple months ago, maybe not even that much, about how a increase in the child find count can be one indication that there's a especially great need for implementation of multi-tiered system supports, not because you don't want to identify students that have needs, of course, I think we're all committed to that, but that some changes in tier 1 or better tiered supports might lessen the extent of students that would exhibit the characteristics that would cause them to qualify for specific learning disabilities or perhaps emotional and behavioral disabilities. That one's a little less clear to me. But is that, like when I look at the child count slide and I I was really excited about this idea that, yeah, if we could help meet the needs of students so that they won't exhibit the characteristics that would cause them to qualify for special education services, and also at the same time help our budget that does not receive fully funded special education cross-subsidy. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, which of these categories, and it seems to me it couldn't be all of them. For example, the deafblind category I wouldn't think would be affected by a well-implemented multi-tiered system of supports, but which of them would you expect to result in a reduction of students that are identified as needing services?
That's a great question. When you look at students, like you mentioned, one of the categories, right, that we would not see a change in that low incidence category. However, our other categories, such as the specific learning disabilities or the emotional and behavioral disabilities, and even other health disabilities, because we might not see that educational impact that they have based off of their diagnosis. For me, those would be the top 3 categories that I think would be most affected, because those are students that are receiving that core instruction the most. The other, some of our other categories, such as developmental cognitive disability, that will be a program that we will have for them forever until they graduate. That will not be impacted. We might do, we will do different things with programming. Our goals will focus in different areas, but that is a different program that we will provide. Those would be the top 3 categories for me that will follow along, and we'll see how those are impacted as we go forward and continue to analyze our child health.
If I could, it's a profound question, and let me be really clear. I am not speaking specifically here in Rochester, but I've also spent 40 years looking at these things elsewhere. I have reason to believe it happens in Rochester, but I'm not at the school level in Rochester. There's a lot of evidence that IEP teams or child study teams, when they see a kid who's profoundly struggling and they have no other supports for them, they identify them as a student with disability to get them service, often knowing that they are in gray area. It's not flagrant, to get them service because there's nowhere else, and they know the kid is not going to get support. That is obviously in contradiction with what we're hearing as best practice. It is well-intentioned, because there's nowhere else for this kid to go. This kid may be presenting everything from dysregulation to profound inability to access the academic content. And if you have nothing, in some ways it is the humane thing to do to get that kid identified. We know that's not what we're aiming for, but that is not an uncommon practice. It's not something people sit in the IEP meeting and say, and it's not in the flagrant area. I'm talking about people in a gray area, where if you have interventions, you're going to say, oh no, this kid needs to be with Miss Jackson. Because she can work wonders with this kid for whether it's dysregulated behavior or reading. But when there's a kid in the gray area and we don't have anywhere else to do it, well, let's move into that space. Again, I'm not speaking on the ground in Rochester, but that's been something that does happen. And it is in many ways the humane thing to do. But it's why we have to have those other interventions in place, so special education is truly for those kids who haven't really gotten there. It's well-intentioned, absolutely. Yeah.
You want to speak about our work on strengthening the existence?
Yeah, sure. On one of the later slides, we went through this quite quickly, but what we're hoping that we see with our stronger MTSS system is that once students start to close that gap and that they become closer to grade level, that we can take a look at, are they ready to transition into tiered supports within that general education classroom and no longer are a child with a disability. We prove that through an evaluation. So that's also what we want to strengthen within our special education supports and our teachers, is understanding what is the difference between a student that requires some tier 1 or tier 2 supports or a student that has a disability. And so we'll be working to strengthen that as well within our program.
So if I might make a final comment, it's important for, I think, cabinet board and the district employees know the great work they're doing. I appreciate Connie, you including and having read out the idea statement because it speaks to the fact that special education services are not placeholder services, and that there's an intentionality design within the act, if you will, that Rochester Public Schools is trying its best to not only meet but exceed. And I'll be, as I'm sure the majority of us will be excited to see how MTSS will inform the work you're doing and the best practices you're currently modeling, and the books that you're probably no doubt write. We'll be studying some point in the future, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before we move on to our next agenda item, we're going to reset our presenters. So I invite Amy to call her. Going down. I'm tempted to.
Just anywhere on this side. We'll all be right back.
Thank you for joining us. Our next item is 4.1, Summer Discovery Update. Superintendent McDowell.
Thank you very much. As board members are aware, we had a little pandemic a few years ago that had a pretty big impact on young people. And school districts around the country have been working to put in place programs and opportunities to pick your phrase that you want to use. Some folks talk about learning loss, some talk about learning recovery, some acceleration. We have had a long-standing, wonderful summer school program in Rochester, but concurrent with that pandemic, we really flipped the switch on the model, such that it really brought back an era in which summer school was about enrichment and acceleration and the whole child. And this has been a key part of our effort to help a significant group of our students make progress from the really extraordinary trauma they encountered during the pandemic. And so Summer of Discovery has just concluded again. Thank you to all of you who found the energy to teach and work in Summer Discovery right after the end of the school year and right before the start of another school year. So no rest for the wicked, but we are grateful. It was amazing to observe the work that was going on. And so now we have an opportunity to hear from the leaders who made it possible. And Amy Ike was our fearless leader of this work, and I want to thank her in particular for really innovative work under very fast timelines every year. This is happening.
Superintendent McDowell, Chair Nathan, board members, we're happy to be with you tonight. As Dr. Patel said, we've just completed our third summer of Discovery. I'll give you a little bit of context and background at the beginning, but
as Summer of Discovery is really a teacher-led initiative. We have a number of the leading teachers here with us tonight to talk to you and give you their perspective. And so we'll kick it off here, and maybe speakers, as you begin your portion here, just introduce yourself along the way. So I won't read this to you as Marlene has said with slides, but a little bit of context. The Brand Corporation has worked for years to study summer learning and identify how summer learning could be useful for students. And so what you see in the presentation is a quote out of their summer learning series that really, I think, encapsulates all the different types of learning that go on in the summer. And because it's summertime and we have a little bit more flexibility, we have a chance under the COVID funds that we received to take some risks, try some new things. You can see in that quote just quite a variety of student skills that are built in high quality summer learning. So a little context, again, for those who either may have forgotten or weren't on the board at the time we started. There was some dissatisfaction before the COVID pandemic with the current summer learning, but we were limited in our financial ability to really change the model deeply. And so, of course, COVID came along, super high stress time, a lot of disconnection between human beings, whether it was students, staff, families. So we were living through that difficult time when the summer funds came available under the American Rescue Plan. And so this set of funds that we used was targeted to summer learning, and it was a perfect infusion that allowed us to really innovate. And so along the way, we involved quite a few voices in that process. A task force of about 50 or so people came together. The majority were district staff of different roles, from central office to school building to what we call ESPs now, or paraprofessionals. We had parents, students, and community partners on that task force to really think through, if we were going to design summer school under the old language, how do we go about that? What would be the most important pieces of that? So that task force actually identified what has led us through these 3 years, the 4 essential learning areas, and then the shifts in professional practice that had to happen to make this possible. And so after the task force, many of the teachers who were on the task force then shifted into a lead teacher role, or what now is known as a site director role. And we gathered many other lead teachers that first year who then took up the mantle of helping sites develop programming under the model that had been designed by the task force. At that point, there was very quick planning going on. As Dr. Patel mentioned, this task force began in January of 2021 after some planning in December of 2020. You might recall that we were not in in-person school at that point. Immunizations had just come out. And again, still that high stress time. These folks stepped up in the middle of that to completely change how we do summer learning. And April 5th is a date that I think will remain with me, and hopefully I didn't get that wrong, but that is the day I remember that students came back. I remember that as a parent, that my daughter had left school in spring of her 8th grade year and came back to school in spring of her 9th grade year. And so that was a major date on our calendar, and some hopefulness for the committee that we could actually pull off a first summer of Discovery. And so we did. That first summer was planned in just probably 5 short months, from ideating the shifts in practice to actually making them happen. There's a note in the lower corner there that I would just point out that that task force, in the midst of its work, made the, I think, very intuitive, or came to that conclusion that this was not a one-year change. That in order to truly do this work, we would need at least 3 years to get all the way to full model. And I would say they were correct. They were able to look in that crystal ball and see that. And so by the end of that first summer, we were getting extremely positive feedback on the model from students, from families, from staff. And so we knew we were onto something here. Well, what makes this approach different from previous summer school approach? One aspect of it is the whole child approach. And you've heard this terminology in education for decades, but the idea that we are not just teaching reading and math to a student and ignoring the rest of that student in terms of their social emotional needs, their potentially experience gaps because of life experience, their skills with other students, and their wellness. It was also critical at the time we began, and remains critical today, that we are all about restoring connection. So this is a human development fabric developing network of people who care about each other. And so students, families, staff, community partners really developing those connections through those shared experiences. Another way we're different is really focusing on rejuvenation for the staff, and that was an unintended consequence of this model. We knew that that was a stressful time we were designing it. I don't think we had any idea how positive this would be for the staff members involved. I see some nods here, and our team will talk about that as well. And then finally, we knew that summer was an opportunity for us to bring new practices or better practices right back into the school year. That the gains we make during summer, whether it be trying out a new instructional technique, building a relationship with a student or with a family, that those carry on beyond the end of the summer program and can really help us do our work during the school. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Lisa.
Hi, I'm Linda Rude. I've taught in the district a few years. So, I don't know exactly how many, but a lot. Anyway, so we looked at this model. The whole child has always been an emphasis on British public schools. But I think sometimes it gets lost in all the other things that we need to be done. And so looking at this summer of Discovery, we wanted to make it exciting, experiential, but not lose the academic piece. We knew that that was also important. We know summer slot to all teach that. So keeping the academics is important. You'll be impressed because I listened to my thing this morning about deeper learning. And one of the things was that peripheral learning. And that's what summer Discovery is. It's that peripheral learning. It's allowing kids within the classroom to go to that deeper learning. Here's some examples. You can see some of the pictures, but the kids in the bottom left down there are doing arrays in math. So they're not, just playing with the flowers. They're actually figuring out, oh, I have a garden, how can I arrange this, and how many flowers do I get in? And so it's looking at math in a different way. We have writing skills that were done. You can see one is, Sierra will talk to me, but it's fingerprint writing, right? The mayor came and visited, and the kids had processed ahead of time, wrote questions, asked things that they thought might be important. So I think that we want to ensure that the academic system is still an important part of our summer Discovery, but more through that deeper and more experiential learning that make it really fun as well. And based on the systems that we had in place, the staff that we were able to add, and the different kind of fundings that we were able to use, we made a possibility and we enjoy as well as deeper.
That's fun. Are you ready for fun? I'm Sierra Linford. Not that you weren't fun. My name is Sierra Linford. I work for the Office of Academics. I'm an instructional facilitator for science and math. I've been a site director for 3 years. It's brings me joy to be with the kids, and it's a wonderful learning opportunity for me to apply research that I'm able to do during the year, work side by side with teachers. It's great. So in the season of, tomorrow's a big professional development day for me, for the entire district tomorrow. So we're gonna do a little picnic. I've been told 5 minutes. Okay. So one of the big things that we focused on is developing a positive mathematical identity with our students. And we do work in groups of like 2 or 3. So to develop,
Well, everybody wants to hear John Carl's.
you've been on this too, this is fun stuff.
Anybody up there want to participate in some math?
Sure, we got here, I'll take an extra.
Love it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love math.
Great. I'm wonderfully glad to have you here.
All right, so to develop this positive mathematical mindset, I went in and we did a professional development with all of our teachers on one of our days, and this work is based on Jill Bowler's work. And I'll get into, we'll debrief that task. But what I need you to do is figure out the least number of squares you can draw in an 11 by 13 rectangle. So work with your partner or partners. The least number of squares you can draw in an 11 by 13 rectangle. Added twist. Draw the rectangle. 11 by 13. 11 by 13. Think I have enough squares? Or are there 3 copies? And now figure out what is the least number of squares you can get to fit in that rectangle.
Say it again.
The least number of squares in an 11 by 13 rectangle. 1 rectangle, well. Okay. The least number of squares in an 11 by 13 rectangle. I didn't count. Okay. Let's put the camera. 11? No, this would be 11. No, but that's yes, I did. Sierra, we have a couple clarifying questions. Great. We need to fill the 11 and 13. The least number of squares.
Can they overlap?
If you laid tile in an 11 by 13 square, would the squares overlap? 11 by 13 rectangle, would the squares overlap?
Wait, do the squares have to be the same size?
No.
Oh. All right, well, we're trying
But do they, when you overlap?
not overlap.
The least number of squares. Okay.
Do we have to fill out all the squares? Okay.
Give you 1 more minute. Just 1 score. Can you try it? How about a 9 by 15? So we'll come back together. Wrap up your thoughts. Let's come up with an answer. All right. Let's start over here. What is the least number of squares you got?
I don't think we really understood the question, because I think we were trying to figure out, like, if we need to use all of the individual units, like, could we just take out some of them? So, yeah, my guess would be 2.
Your guess is 2. Okay.
Maybe I have it.
This is 11, 13, just 1 square.
Okay. All right.
Love that.
All right. Did you get okay? 8 squares. How about over here?
We have 8.
8. Okay. The point of this is I'm not going to tell you the answer. Because it's not about the answer. It's about the process. This is a low floor, high ceiling activity. So you have those students that come in and they're going, well, 1, done. But you might have some other students that come in and they want to challenge themselves in different ways and see what is this. Maybe do I have to cover them all up? So it allows you to bring what you know to the room and build on that identity as a math learner and work collaboratively with partners. So that's the work that we did with our professional development. So we kind of based it off of 6 main principles. So teachers and students believe everyone can achieve at high levels. I expected everybody in here to be able to come up with something. And everybody did, right? And it wasn't about what's right or wrong. We believe that learning that math is visual. You had colors, you had paper, you were able to make mistakes and adjust your thinking as you went. Math is open. And the class is a risk-taking, mistake-valuing environment. And that's what we really worked to incorporate into our summer of discovery. So that's just how we tie in the math pieces. We also have wonderful resources such as Dreambox and some other classroom resources as well. But math mindset work, that was me bringing in my job during the school year into summer of discovery, and I loved it. And the kids bringing their divergent thinking and experiencing success builds that positive identity and makes them think, hey, I could be good at math too in my own way. And that's one of the most important things you can do in summer of discovery is build that positive self-worth and identity during our time together.
So Sierra, if we were in the classroom,
Yes.
the students might be asked to share how they got to their answer, which would help other students understand there are multiple pathways to the answer, correct?
Yep.
So we wouldn't just drop it in a real classroom.
No, I wouldn't. No, you got it. But a lot of that is justifying your reasoning and going visual and being able to go verbal and tying in those multiple modalities into that work is really, really important. So we tied in number talks were a big hit. Some teachers explored building thinking in classrooms, which is kind of a modified version of what I did with you today.
Is Dreambox Math an example of it's described as AI-driven
Yes.
learning software? I think that's maybe something we've talked about before, superintendent, in the context of the types of things that the technology can support. Could you tell us a little bit about Dreambox?
I can tell you my experience as a teacher. I know they've done a lot of research, and when we talk about piloting different opportunities on the Office of Academic side, supporting elementary math, I loved being able to sit side by side with students and being able to go, tell me about this compared to IXL, and kind of talking with our students as they were doing it. But it's kind of a game-based, student choice-driven, so forced choice-driven. It's aligned to standards. Students would go in, I believe typically with the diagnostic piece. We did not take the diagnostic. There were some learning pieces with that through our summer piece, but they were able to jump in and do tasks. And if they got questions wrong, there were opportunities for instruction to kind of redirect that or to challenge them to think differently. If they got them right, it gave kind of additional challenge and they would move through. So I believe we got through all of the students, 13,000 Dreambox lessons this summer in 4 weeks, and I'll say really 3 weeks because, coming off of that technology challenge, we were all learning and growing together. But it was a great opportunity for that adaptive instruction, and I think they were really engaged in that opportunity as well. It was more, I would say, more gamified, and what I appreciated from the math lens, the instructional piece, was that the feedback that it gave students was moving more from concrete to abstract. So it was very tangible feedback, visual versus text heavy, when that can be a limitation for some of our students as well.
It's interesting, the platform stays the same in the classroom. So a child could be working on a first or second grade math skill or a seventh grade math skill. But the platform and the gaming part is the same. So the kids aren't aware of, I'm on the lowest level or anything like that. They are seeing and talking with their friends about the different parts of the game. Again, with the cyber event, it did take us a while to get it up and running and as successful as we had hoped, but we were amazed at how well it went.
I had a lot of teachers want to be able to dig in further to what data could this give me and how could I use this moving forward. Our teachers want that. We just weren't able to get there yet with our summer Discovery.
So when our community hears AI, when it comes to this kind of software, it's really the responsiveness to the student performance and the responsiveness to be able to give tutorials or additional instruction based on the students.
And then immediate feedback. I mean, it wasn't, okay, friends, go sit down. We're all gonna do Dreambox. It was, we're gonna do Dreambox, and I'm gonna work with this small group, and I'm gonna provide some targeted support for your math skills. And then you'll go back and you'll work on this, and then I'm gonna work with this. So it freed up the teacher to be able to provide some targeted interventions or support, or to walk around and support their work and gather information for our students as well.
We will look at it. There's also Dreambox reading. And like any large language model for artificial intelligence, the reason it's powerful is because not only is it activating across millions of kids with what you do on that problem, if the kid gets the right response, it validates the response that the kid, and it moves it up the priority so that a student is benefiting from the correct answers and the feedback that got the correct answer from thousands or millions of users. And so that's really the exciting promise. I think, yes, there's a specter with AI and scrubbing robots and things like that, but it really is that all of us are smarter than some of us, point where you're seeing this. And I think the most powerful application of AI to education will be in that tutoring space. It doesn't replace deeper learning and what teachers have done, but it helps that kid who couldn't understand place values get a prompt that worked for another kid that couldn't understand place value, that was validated thousands of times in the same system. So, pretty cool.
So Dreambox was an excellent piece. The other just points that I wanted to touch on was the supporting multilingual learners and intentional instructional planning. The site that I was at had a wonderful co-teaching partnership at the elementary level between our multilingual teacher and our general education teacher, which was also kind of a model that we're working on this year, rolling out at the elementary level as well. So the teacher was already able to foster some of those relationships ahead of time. So that was really wonderful to see. One of the activities that was pictured was that unique fingerprint writing. So that was a co-taught lesson. So the one on the bottom right. So what you're seeing there is on the right, there's a line sheet of paper, and they're using the sentence stems that the multilingual teacher and the gen ed teacher modeled and wrote through, and they're writing ways that they're unique, things that make them them. So we're bringing in that identity piece, bringing in that writing, really working on sentence structure in an authentic way. And then they took that and they wrote it into like a fingerprint. And there was a book that went along with this as well, but they wrote that and then did a self-portrait, each in their own unique medium to do that. So that went really well. The last thing I want to touch on as learning in our classrooms was the impact of our student interns. Our high school student interns were extremely valuable, and I did invite Medved to be here. She was not able to be here, but I do want to read her words to get her voice in the room. I asked them then 5 questions. So what did you enjoy about being an SMD intern? So this is her second year doing this, different site. She said, I loved working with and building connections with the kids. I asked, what was the challenge of being an SOD intern? So the children ignoring and speaking over us at times, and sometimes having bad attitudes. I love that she connected with those students in ways that we could not. Though our students saw themselves in her and not necessarily in our teachers, and she was a wonderful presence in that classroom. She was with kids, playing with kids, sitting with kids, working with them the whole time. So how did you grow, or what did you learn about yourself during your experience as an intern? She said, I grew a lot of patience, because in order to work with these kids, you need a lot of patience. I learned that in order for all of us to get along and get together, I needed to build a connection with these kids and get to know them. And I thought that was so powerful, because that's what we work with our teachers with every day as well. How do you think your presence as an intern impacted the students you worked with? She said, I feel like I impacted them in a very positive way. I had a kid saying they wanted to be like me when they grow up. And I feel like they really loved having me as their intern, and I had a lot of fun. What is one recommendation you have for improving yours or others' experiences as an intern? She said, although you want these kids to act like, or to like you, make sure that they know you still have authority and you're not just their friend. So it's very insightful. I can't tell you how many times we've tried to recruit her to the education profession, but she was an invaluable asset to our students, and I think she learned and grew a lot as well.
Okay. We had about 45 interns this summer, student interns, all high school students. The original task force felt this was one way that we could connect with students differently, using older role models from within school, closer in age, and also reflective of the student audience, where sometimes we struggle with that, as you know, in a teacher corps, to be reflective of our own. We're going to move on to learning not just in our classroom, but in our community, and Akila is going to share something.
Hello, my name is Akila Sharif. I had the opportunity to be a site director this year at an elementary school and a middle school. And met Big Birds for a beautiful segue into the reality that connection really impacts content, or your ability to take in content. I know as we are entering our back to school week, that's one of the big pushes, like the first couple weeks of the school year, make sure you're building that relationship, because it does a lot of the legwork in advance for the school year. But a unique thing about summer discovery is that those things, both of those components occur simultaneously. There is in some of the pictures, there are activities or field trips where it just seems like it's fun, but it actually brings to life the contextual readings at the elementary school, or there's connection to career pathways for elementary, middle, and high school. And so it really brings a different relevance to what is being taught in the classrooms. The teachers, it also teaches the reality of responsibility and roles that each person can have, be it in the community for the students or for the staff. And a lot of the field trips that we went on, there was a collective engagement and participation. It allowed a different space for the teachers to not have to be the teachers. So, for example, there was a field trip to Oxbow Park, and one of the activities was just mindfulness, like really channeling all of your senses. And so it wasn't just the students sitting on the floor, it was the staff sitting on the floor, and there was the mutual vulnerability and like closing your eyes. Is anyone looking at me? Okay, don't look, I'm gonna peek. And just a discomfort, but a collective discomfort, and then which transitioned to like a collective ownership, and we're just all doing this together. Also through the variety of field trips, it became glaringly obvious that the community is interested and willing and eager to engage with the schools, they're just looking for opportunities. And so that was really cool to see. I think I already stated that the field trips and the community engagement really helped enhance the learning experience. And then at Kellogg specifically, we had blended classrooms, and so it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And with each field trip and even at the building as well, there were just different opportunities for students to be the teachers, to be the learners, and to be the supporters. One field trip specifically, we went to Silver Lake and we went fishing. And there were students who, like, this was second nature. They do it with their eyes closed. I'm not familiar with fishing terminology, but hey, that was fine because there were other students that were not, and then there were students that were. So, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we did not keep the fish. But while we were fishing and a fish was reeled in, there was a 6th grader who was like, oh, you know, and I'm going to be very generic because, as I said, I'm not a fisherman. But she was able to describe and help navigate another peer unhooking the fish, and was also like, it was a bloody mess, but she was able to really break it down calmly and educationally, and that relationship really changed the dynamic for those two for the remainder of that field trip, and it also allowed her an opportunity to shine. It allowed someone else to learn and not have to go find the one adult or the one teacher for that. So it just really changed the community for the group at Summer of Discovery, but also the community as we were going on these field trips. Additionally, there was opportunity for student leadership, for blended exposure, blended knowledge, and blended common language. I think if I have not grown up on a farm and we're in a class and we're talking about farms, then I'm automatically at a disadvantage. And so Summer of Discovery has allowed opportunity to bridge that gap and create common language and exposures for everyone, including the staff and students. There was a point at the end of the summer where Amy, or maybe it was just a collective, we had come together and spent some time reflecting on Summer of Discovery. And one of the things that stood out to me was how much Summer of Discovery is kind of the very sentiment of we're in this together, right? It's not just, it was in neutral grounds where there was learning, but there was also relationship building. There was also community integration, but an expansion of community for the students and staff. And it was done in a way that laid the foundation for this upcoming school year, but also years to come. And I truly believe it will change things for students in the coming years and for staff in the coming years. This was my first year doing Summer of Discovery, and I was like, wow, what a missed opportunity. How did I not do this sooner? Now that said, it was all of June and all of July, so I'm not sure about next year. But I enjoyed it for this year. Thank you.
I'm Catherine Gardner. I've been the site director. I teach at Century, and I've been the site director for all 3 years. And I do want to say that the QA says the minimum number of squares drawn on that paper is 0. So just keep that in mind. So the 3 years of this feels like sort of the dark underbelly of Summer of Discovery. The students that are in high school that are taking Summer of Discovery are doing credit recovery. They have gotten no credit in some class, and so we're offering credit recovery for them. The first year, each school was at their own site. It was new. When Amy mentioned the April date, one of the things for us is because of vaccines, we got to be maskless with the kids that first summer, which was kind of a game changer. Last year, we all were at Mayo High School together, all three high schools. And it was, dare I say, a little miserable because we went to like a choice board model and the kids basically sat in front of their Chromebooks and we didn't do as much. This year we got out and we got out in the community. We hired a teacher, Shane Baker, to establish field trips for the kids, experiences, brought people in. You know, they're teenagers, so in our evaluations, some of them are like, the best thing ever was getting out and about. We had a kid, they went to the Lim Lab, who wanted to do an internship at the Lim Lab, and they went bowling, and they did the trolley tour, and you know, they, like, so, others, their evaluations said, if we could have just stayed in the class and got our work done, that would have been way better, right? So, but for the most part, it really, I think, brought the kids out into the community places, and it might be a year from now where they see that impact, and they tied it in intentionally with the lessons. So if the prioritized learning in social studies were to be doing compare and contrast, they were comparing and contrasting different neighborhoods in Rochester when they did the trolley tour. They did cooking lessons where the math teachers put together lessons that were there. They did an art walk of downtown, and the English teachers designed lessons for them to get out and look at the art in downtown Rochester. So we tried to get each of the classes out at least once a week so that they were out there actually doing something, and it got better and better as the year went by. We're already looking at next summer. Well, I should be planning for next week. Well, maybe sure. We're already looking at trying to condense it to fewer weeks, and doing a capstone kind of model where the kids would take one class in sort of a traditional setting, but then we would have where they do project-based portfolio kind of thing for another one of the credits that they could make up in summer school, which I think would be really exciting and empower the kids and maybe bring the community in even more. And we have some great community. The multi-language learner kids and the newcomer kids went out to a farm that this former Century family that owned, and it was just, and they were greeted so warmly, and they got ice cream and cheese curds. We didn't pay for the cheese curds.
Thank you both. Community has been a big part of our development of this. You can see some of the photos here. Khadija and Fatima came from Pomoja Women and taught the students how to make sambusa. Makita Davis, who owns Everyday 365 Clothing downtown, came to our middle school level students, did a couple of days of visioning, career, future visioning, talked about being an entrepreneur in small business, and then took the kids on a visit to small business, minority-owned small businesses in Rochester, so that they could really see some of the people who have started these businesses and the different types of businesses that they have begun. Over on the right, some of you board members came to JA and saw the medical simulation by Mary Clark. In the lower right is Michelle Clark of Shell's Kitchen, a catering company, and she and her partner, Connie Cohen, taught cooking skills in the Dakota Slice Kitchen. So I think Akila said it, that our community really does want to help. We didn't have anybody turn us down when we asked for help. And others who have been offering for quite a while, we finally had a place to say yes. Let's do this. Why people experience for our students.
Another component that we put forward when we were designing this was a wellness component. We live in Minnesota, we're a better place to experience wellness is out in nature. We get all 3 months of it. So we need to use it, and we did. Summer schools, schools across the district were finding fun ways to get out and use it. Like Akila said, one, they just did wellness in the school climates. Sometimes they fished, they caved. We were looking for micro organisms. They did, at the left, they were doing the challenges and doing the roping courses and growing together and working together. The teacher would go right in there with them, being a part of it. And to me, this nature piece also gives them context in their head. They can hear other friends saying, oh, we went here, do you know what the ropes courses are? And they do know, and they can relate, and they can help each other to grow and learn beyond just that one field trip. I think we have Phil.
Yes, Phil Hartman wanted to be here tonight, but he had a conflict, so he sent us this little clip. So hopefully we can hear from
Phil Hartman. I'm a special education teacher here at Willow Creek Middle School. And some of the things that, I heard from some of the students were things like, this is the first time I've been in a creek before. This is the first time I've ever caught a fish before. Things like that. This is the first time I've ever been hiking. When we went down to Whitewater State Park specifically, we had a great opportunity for our science teachers to pre-teach academic lessons, specifically on geology and geography and some of the life science aspects that students would run into when we got down to Whitewater. Some of the organisms, some of the rock formations, some of the plants that we want to look for but also stay away from, and things like that. So it was a great opportunity to pre-teach academic skills and then get out in the out in nature and really engage in some of these things, like I said, that kids might not get to in their life. You should have seen the smiles on all the kids' faces. We had love to tell you more. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Can I just add one thing? As we're talking about these experiences, academic and nature, the field trips, I share an office with our 3 elementary literacy people, and we've been, no, it's wonderful because what we're talking about is knowledge building. And when we look at the new standards of literacy and things that are coming, we're focusing a lot with our teachers, and they're going to get professional development on this tomorrow, about the importance of knowledge building and academic vocabulary, and the experiences that these students are getting is crucial and critical to the development and attaching meaning from what they're learning in the classroom to the world around them. So this is just really, it will build in and only help in so many different aspects when we're talking about that knowledge building.
And of course, there's lots of research how nature, being outdoors are good teachers for us. The reasoning skills, the abilities, you can read this all yourself. But we know personally that the analytical skills, just the life skills of going the outdoors and being able to use some stress relief and social inclusion that we can feel with others. And some of those crucial other skills that we learn when we're out in nature. And again, some of it's that deeper learning where we have time to really ask ourselves questions, to explore, to try some different kinds of learning, because we have the time and the space to be able to do it. And I think that's what we want to continue to do, is making sure students have time and space to learn at their own levels and own interests.
Giving learning an audience. I was in Overland for Summer Discovery this year, and the middle picture is showing one of the 5 beautiful displays of student work that we were able to come up with. And first we were a little stressed out about it, about having the community come in and having to have something to show in such a, while it feels like it's a lot of time, it also doesn't feel like it's enough time when you're building in all of these different elements. But our site decided they wanted every student to do some sort of writing and some sort of self-portrait about how they view themselves. And so we had self-portraits from going into first grade to going into 5th grade, surrounding the room. We built off of an existing practice that Overland had, which is inviting families for lunch. So that was already kind of instilled in the culture of that building. We also had some neighborhood, or not neighborhood schools, district-wide option schools that have students that come here as well. And so to be able to come and see the students seeing each other's work after spending that time together, and the authentic audience for that. And so that was a really wonderful opportunity for students to see each other's work, for students to see themselves and to be proud of what they came up with, and to connect with parents. And so it was also an opportunity for the teachers to connect with the parents that we've been working with these students and have really informal conversations, sitting with and meeting with and learning about those families alongside their students. It was just a beautiful opportunity. And the picture on the left, they did a Zen garden over at Bishop. And then on the right, they had a music specialist, bringing in some of those experiences, and put on a concert for their families as well. So it was a really great opportunity that I think maybe was missing 2 years prior, to have that family engagement piece and to showcase what this new Summer of Discovery model is all about. And it's about the kids and showing and then being proud of themselves and their identity.
When we looked over the continuous improvement from the year before, that was one of the pieces where we wanted to improve, is to get more families and more communities involved and understand what was going on. So we talked about this showcase, brought it up to the St. George's and platforms but we were so pleasantly surprised. Everyone really loved it. They really went into it, did some wonderful things at their school, and so we were very happy to work with this.
One of the things that we do every year, as Linda just mentioned, is a continuous improvement plan. And we're always working on ways to assess what's going on and to find practices that we should expand. So bright spots that we should expand across the program. And so you see a quote there from the perspective of the way to do appreciative inquiry is to find the positives, find those bright spots, and then really expand them. So too often they say, we're talking about what's broken and how do we fix it, and we take a little bit different approach with Summer of Discovery. We definitely hear what's broken, so we're not ignoring it, and we are fixing that along the way as well. But when we do our, bring our staff all together, we're really looking for what are those elements of success that we can expand. And this year we created a tool, piloted it probably 20 to 25 times. It's a story gathering tool, and the idea is for someone to walk into a classroom at any given point and check against the goals of the program, what they're seeing in the classroom, and look for those bright spots that we can expand. Share a little bit.
Yeah, I think one thing I really want to make sure that you heard was that there's an impact from this program that has a continuous effect on the students' learning for life. And so something that you all experienced even when Sierra passed out the papers and got the markers, you all kind of had this confidence in a way. Like, even though this was a weird task and you were sitting next to you, you knew that you were a learner and you were going to be able to kind of accomplish this or come up with something. Unfortunately, something that happens with a lot of our students, especially ones who maybe are falling behind or maybe are on their list for summer school because they have a fundamental skill that they need a little more help on, is they start to create this identity of themselves as like, I'm not good at math, I'm not a good student, I'm not good at working with stuff. And so I know you've heard like we have all these like opportunities for growth and good connections with teachers and everything here, but what it really boils down to is all of that starts to change how the students just improve themselves in the classroom and in the building where they are. So this, I'll also put a small plug because I'm also a SPED teacher and a gen ed teacher, and so I love watching the SPED presentation. And I've got to say one of the magical key ingredients that all of my students who graduate from SPED, or all of the one magical ingredient that all of my students who make progress in these fundamental skills in the classroom, is their ability to advocate
for help and what they need. Can they raise their hand? Do they see that they just haven't figured something out yet? And do they have the confidence to work with others? And this is an incredibly small program. I mean, we're there for like almost just 3 weeks. And so sometimes I think people look like, well, how much reading growth did they do? Well, how much did they do here? How much did they do here? And we're kind of limiting our scope to what did they accomplish in like 3 weeks. And I've got to tell you, the thing that I've witnessed over the last 3 years is just that growth of self-identity is huge. I also think that it's reflected in our recruitment, because I think in the beginning, it was like, oh, my student doesn't go to summer school. Or these kids are like, oh, I go to summer school. And I tell you, last year, like, we're fighting at the door. Like, we almost can't get enough staff for it. Like, these families believe in, people are seeing the difference, they're seeing growth, and kids want that. Yeah, just please.
Oh, so as a part of our continuous improvement, this year we did a complete reflection day, and it included all staff. So it was the paraprofessionals, it was the nurses, the student interns, the teachers, the counselors. We included everyone to have a voice on what works. What do we need to continue to do? How do we make this an even better situation? And it was very positive, I felt, in the room. We saw lots of great ideas. We first shared what really worked in theirs, and then we went across the district and we got to share in other schools. There's a little fun fact up there that by the time we were done, one school had already got commitments from all their staff to do it again next summer, and had already been thinking about things they wanted to review and things they heard and thought that was good, and we can get those experiences included next year. So I think it's not just for kids. I think we have to keep in mind that staff are really being rejuvenated, are being able to try some different things that maybe they hadn't done before. A couple of them just said, oh, this just fills my bucket. By the end of the school year, sometimes I'm tired. I put in a lot of effort, but I want to come something. I want to do things different. I want to see kids at a different level. So I think we saw a lot of those good things coming out of our profession.
One of the items that was in Assembly for you that we haven't brought into the slides were the staff reported gains and the staff reported student gains. So I hope you had a chance to read those. There are some amazing comments in the words of our staff members about just what Linda is talking about there. One of the things, kind of our focus of that reflection day was really to learn across sites and across positions, across levels, and really integrate that learning. And what came out of it was a couple of things, and you see those listed on the slide. One was, what if something was successful this summer, what were the attributes that made it successful? What were those things that were either in the system or the people or the planning that made it successful? And you see there some of the top, as we asked across all the groups, some of the top things that they felt made for successful conditions. So as we think about the deeper learning tree and the roots, the conditions towards success, that's kind of what we're talking about here too. And notice collaboration among teachers, number 2 out of the entire list of hundreds of commonalities across success. The other list is that list of practices that we should be expanding. So finding out from our staff where we need to put energy and resources into expanding practices. And you'll notice they want to get started planning. And as Catherine said, the high school met last week already to start planning for next summer. I have just a little bit of participation data in the summer. Our numbers continue to grow each year. So you can see the unduplicated totals at each level. So we're approaching that 2,500 mark as we hit our 3rd year here. And we always want to make sure that we're reaching the students who need us the most. So we always do a check on how the summer of Discovery demographics match our school district demographics. And so this chart actually shows you at each level, the orange bars are summer of Discovery, and the proportion of students that qualified for free or reduced lunch, higher in each of those levels than our district population. And the same in the historically marginalized identities, that we want to make sure that we are not sampling in any of those areas. And again, this year. Thank you. So that just gives you an idea of the number of people that are needed to pull off this model. And one of the special things about this model are the support systems that are a part of the model. That's what makes it possible to do all the work you've heard about tonight. The changes that were recommended by the task force that we have kept going are things like making sure the site director isn't also responsible in a classroom for a group of students and can't get away to actually manage the things that come up in the site, whether it be a parent concern, a transportation concern, a behavior issue, the weather, whatever it might be. The site director is needed to be nimble and available. Another thing is to bring additional perspectives to the table. The multilingual learning specialists, the mental wellness experts, and the special education or student support specialists, and our student intern support. You have just a few quotes there off the sheet. And then I'm talking about sustainability. So one of the big issues that faces us is as the COVID dollars close, the way to sustain this model is to secure additional funding. So we do still have what the Minnesota state offers for summer school funding, which is called targeted services. It runs through the ALC, and it provides a reimbursement model of about $4 per student per hour of summer learning. That was only enough to do the old model. So if we wanted to keep this model going, or something similar to it, we will need additional funds going forward after next summer. We've banked those proceeds from the first 3 years in the ALC accounts, but we have a competing need for the ALC dollars, and that is a middle school ALC in the district. And so we're having some conversations. Dr. Patel is really looking closely at that. So we might have to look elsewhere. We will need significant funds to maintain the model. Possible sources, as you can see, just brainstorming, certainly the targeted services funds, potentially other district funds combined with some support from outside the district. Or if the board would like to put it on their legislative list of maybe encouraging the state to increase that targeted services formula that we go by. I think the challenge that you see with grants is sometimes you get a little bit of that scope creep, where the grant determines where you're headed instead of your intentional planning. Certainly they're temporary, and then you have the labor problem. But we wanted to make you aware that this is an issue facing us after next summer, and that you will hear more about it as we go forward.
So finally, we're still working on this continuous improvement. We want to continue to make summer school and certainly the best experience for students possible. We're looking at fast bridge testing for early in our district now. Can we use that to help us really launch faster into, like you said, it's only short weeks that we do summer school. Can we use some of that information to really help us better in figuring out how we share that information? How do we continue to do staff development to help all parties that are working with the kids do better? We want earlier planning so that we can get these experiences put in place and then start building the STEM and the SEL lessons to fill in and make sure that it all fits together and we can get the best for the total child, not just the academic piece. I get to close this out saying that I've taught summer school for 37 years. I taught an old model where, as a site director, I had to deal with nursing, I had to do the security, I had to answer phones, I had to talk to the bus driver, I had to talk to the kid that was having a meltdown on the other end while I'm teaching a literature circle with, 8 other 5th graders. Was it possible? Yes. Did we make it work? The staff that was teaching summer school at that time were still very dedicated on the staff. But the line was, well, be creative. When I say, well, you can funding, you can buy some Play-Doh. Be creative. That might make it yourself. But this model has been changing, I think, for the whole system. And I say that honestly. I think the kids have gained so much in their learning and in their SEL and their whole child. But I think it also has helped our staff. And their staff has felt honored, respected, and are bringing those new initiatives and ideas and things that they tried in summer school and bring it forward and try different things during the school year. Honestly, if I was clean in the world, this would be the model all year long. That we are really meeting kids where they're at. We allow them that chance to really learn and do the things they need to do and want to do. And so, thank you for allowing this summer discovery. Really swimming. Thank you all. Board members. Any questions, comments? I'm not gonna like leave that because the slides are great. The time I spent when I came to visit was amazing. I was ready to dive in and take a picture with them, but they would have far outshone anything I could have done. In the background information, not in your slides, I think board members and the community, if you look at it, you spell out the tie between summer discovery and the strategic plan, and I think that's really important. I think what we've seen about summer discovery the past few years has been that tie between summer and school year, but even more intentionally, I think the lessons that we're learning from summer discovery leading into the initiatives that we have with the strategic plan. I mean, anybody who's heard about both things can see it happening in action. And the comments about the staff feeling rejuvenated and renewed and refreshed after working more. And that's the thing that I heard from the staff when I was talking to them, and obviously you all tonight, the comments from the staff. You took on more work and you're more energized from doing that. And I think given the challenges that educators face, the fact that we're just willing to step up to do this is something we really appreciate. But I'm so glad to see that it also worked out for you as well as it did for the students.
Madam Chair, if I could just add to your comment there, we are unique among many districts, and we've heard from our participation in the Wallace Foundation District Summer Learning Network that many districts across the country are struggling to get staff to work in the summer. And we feel extremely fortunate here that this is a program with staff on work.
Board members, and Superintendent, do you want to comment just in terms of that when we might talk about the fiscal challenge beyond 2024, what happens next?
I'm just going to defer any more specific discussion of that. It would be part of our larger funding redesign strategy. It's, as Amy alluded, one of many hard decisions ahead of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Looking at my colleagues who would like to take a little break before we drive everything. Yes, all right. We will come back at 7:10.
we start.
All right, ready? Great. Board is back in session at 7:10 p.m. The next agenda item is a prep for action, school board annual board calendar dates, ABCD review, and year-ahead planning. At the first meeting in January of 2024, the board will take action on the dates for the 2024 school board meetings and the ABCD. So tonight, we're going to review the agenda items for the ABCD. Just to remind the board and the community that agenda items are chosen to support successful operation of the district and student achievement and well-being. They might be required by policies or statute. They might be related to strategic plan monitoring or decisions. They might support the policy-making role of the board, track budget decisions and monitoring, and include evaluations of and goal setting for the superintendent and board. So board members, there's a number of documents in Sidley. We're going to be tracking it through the document titled Topics for 2024 ABCD. Or Topics for ABCD 2024. And the first thing we're going to look at is the draft dates for the 2024 meetings, which is the second document in Sidley. It's the chart of the colored board meeting dates. So what we're going to try to do tonight is get some board consensus around some of the decisions that will set the basically the list of to-dos that mostly Lori will lead, along with the exec committee when necessary, to make that draft of the ABCD that you'll see at the first meeting in January, that we make available at every board meeting, that sets out for every meeting in each of our topic areas what our draft agenda items are going to be for the meeting. So the first question we have to review and recommit to is it our goal to still have 2 regular meetings and a study session per month? It's been a model that we've used for a while. And it just gives any board member a chance to speak up one way or another. But just to point out that for 2024, that will not be possible in all months. There'll be many months where we only have 2 meetings, actually 2 meeting dates available, because it's a year of a number of elections, and those are dates where we are not allowed to even hold a meeting. So one other thing to consider is if we only have the availability to do 2 meeting dates a month, would the board agree to one of those meetings being a regular meeting and one of those meetings then being a study session? So any thoughts? Pro con? Because if I don't hear anything, we're just going to keep it.
I mean, do we need to change the language of the goal to say something like, these, it will be this, unless this? And then just
Oh, there's nothing formal that we have to, like, any language we have to change. We just have to agree that when we're setting the schedule. Oh,
okay with not meeting that goal.
What?
We're okay with not meeting that expectation
Okay.
of the 2 and the 1.
We don't have a choice.
Yeah, well, we don't have anything like written down in policy or anything that requires us to do it. It's just our practice.
Yeah.
So we're okay with saying when we can, we'll do 2 regular and 1 study, except in the months where we may only have 2 meetings and then we would have 1 regular and 1 study.
I guess my question would be, deciding between regular and study, are the things we need to vote on, or are the things we're going to study?
Right.
Could we have some flexibility if we need to? Sure. But we have to be next July.
Right, I think the general practice of setting the calendar will really be driven by what the agenda items are. So you're right, if Mr. Carlson says, I have a whole list of bids that need to be approved, but unfortunately because of the cycle of when those bids are available, I'm might have some available at the beginning of the month and some available at the end of the month. We can either, and we only have 2 dates for the month, we can either have 2 regular sessions or, worst case scenario, not even just an alternative, we can have a special session, both before or after a study session, to just take care of the business if something comes up. So we've got the flexibility. I like to preserve a commitment to a study session, because I think it makes our work better. I think the conversations we've had at a study session, especially in the prep for action, really I think has allowed us to make better decisions regarding the strategic plan and other items this year. Director.
Well, I like you, I agree that it makes sense to have 2 regular meetings and study session every month, with the caveat that I don't want to have us just making up stuff we need study sessions for. So if there's no need for the study session, just cancel it.
Which would mean even in some months only having 1 meeting.
Well, I mean, it's like, we could have 4 meetings in January. Okay, that's maybe not.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Well, I mean, I don't think we should have a study session unless there's something we really need to study.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I'm assuming that there will be most often, but generally speaking, they have 2 business meetings, 1 study session each month. And clearly this year's gonna be tricky because some of the ones are taken on the 3rd of November, for instance, is gonna be tricky.
Right.
And others.
Right. So one other foundational decision that could be a change is we have had our regular meeting start at 5:30 and we've had our study session start at 5. We've heard various times from the community that it's a little confusing to have 2 different start times for the meetings. And talk a little bit about history about why we may have had study sessions start at a different time than regular meetings. But wanted to throw it out there for the board to discuss whether we wanted to have a consistent start time of 5:30 for all of our meetings, regardless of whether they were regular or study sessions.
I'll just say, I had not thought about this until it came up in exec, and I'm strongly in favor of a common start time, because it's just good customer service. They know then the board always meets at 5:30, and there's not that level of confusion, and so.
It's good for board members not to have that level of confusion.
There you go, too, and superintendent. It just hit me, why do we do it at a different time? And so, I'm strongly supportive of moving to 5:30.
I very much favor all of 5:30 rather than all of 5.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why I proposed to go at 5:30. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we'll move to 5:30 study session and a 5:30 regular session.
On the color-coded chart here, the blue dates are the ones that you're thinking we might not want to have just because they're close to other things that we would want to avoid, but we could meet those things if we.
Right.
Okay,
So, yes, and that's excellent segue. So if we look at the months, January and February look like we could follow our traditional pattern of get there and direct normal, 2 regular meetings and a study session. March is the first month where we have a convocation. We would ordinarily meet that first week, but that is the presidential primary. And Ms. Sam is checking with the county to see if the township elections are actually being held on the 12th. Because according to MSBA, the 12th is May. We're not allowed to have a meeting if township elections are being held. So it's very possible that then the only regular available date is the 19th. The 26th is a date that's available, but there's already one board member who's going to be out of the country.
That's a 4-week span between meetings if we couldn't meet until the 19th.
Right. But unfortunately, in that February, March, if we're not allowed to have a meeting in the township election, then we won't have a choice but to have the meeting, the last meeting in February be the 20th and the first one in March be the 19th. Unless we
Have one on a different day.
have information of when the meetings can be held, and then we have all the things on the ABCD and are able to merge those two pieces, we'll know whether it's an extenuating circumstance where we have to pick another day. April, even though the first week is spring break, we still have 5 weeks in April to work with, so we would still be able to have 3 meetings in April. May is the same, there are 3 weeks available. We'll have a conversation later about whether an additional meeting is needed on the timing of the budget. We'll talk about that when we get to the budget. June, we have 3 weeks available, but as we move into July, you see we have the 4th of July week, and we're proposing not to have a board meeting on the 9th, simply because all of the prep work for the board packet, all the cabinet work would have to take place during that 4th of July week in order for us to have a meeting that next Tuesday. So it might be better to have the meetings in July in those last 16th and 23rd. We traditionally do not have our full complement of meetings in July. There's been years ago we had 1, there's most years we've only had 2. And then August, while the 6th there's no conflict with that date, that has been the National Night Out date, and in the past, the board has chosen to change the meeting time of our meetings from 4 to 6, so that people can go participate in the National Night Out activities. The district has actually held, in the past, National Night Out activities out in our own neighborhood. So that, I'm just gonna stop there for a point of discussion about how board members would feel about on that date. And it would, we'd be, probably stop at 6, we'd schedule our agenda so we could be done by then. What are your thoughts about? Director Mark?
I think that's worthwhile past the 46.
Except for people who have day jobs.
Right, that's why I'm bringing it up.
As one of those, I think doing that on that basis, we would end up planning the whole year to act.
Is that good with all our working people? All right.
Yeah.
All right. We can't have one on the 13th because it's a primary election. And we're recommending not having a board meeting date to make that 3rd meeting that last week of August because it's the first week of school. And just to give our team a little bit of a breather as they bring school back up. We're also recommending not having it on September 3rd. Same reason, it would be the first week of school that they would have to be preparing the board packet for. But we still have 3 meeting dates available in September. October, we have 3 meeting dates available and 2 extra if anybody wants to have extra meetings in October. We have a lot of 5 Tuesday months, thank you. In November, our first meeting first Tuesday in November is election day, so we can't have a meeting then. But we still have 2 meeting dates, and we're recommending not having a meeting Thanksgiving week. And then we have 3 meeting dates in December. Yes,
Question. For October, would it make sense maybe to have 3 meetings, one of them either on the 22nd or the 29th, because it is going to be a month between the October meeting and the first November meeting.
There would also be 6 weeks in a row of meetings. There would be 6 weeks in a row of meetings if we had the 3 at the end of September and the 3 at the beginning of October.
I'd like to just jump back to August for a minute. For the Minnesota primary election, don't we have to certify, assuming that we have one, don't we have to certify those results like within 3 days, and we've got kind of a little on that last
Just
time?
looking that up, because I realized I didn't point that out, so yes, you're gonna need a 5-minute board meeting on probably August 16th.
Because it has to be within
3
3 days, as opposed to the general, which is 10 days. Okay. So August 16th, somewhere between the 14th, 15th, or 16th. And that's a certification of primary results.
Actually, has to be 15th or 16th, it's 2nd or 3rd day.
So that is a Thursday or Friday? Board members, does anybody have any preference? Just a Thursday or Friday, I mean, that's a long day.
Our county partners would probably prefer Friday. It just gives them an extra little bit of time to process, because they gotta do from the city as well. So that
I think Friday.
So Friday, so add in on Friday at 6.
And there's a possibility we might not have a party.
this would be canceled if you don't have a primary.
Right, that's true. But we won't shift our regular meeting to that date. We'll just meet, have a quick budget meeting, and then have the other meeting on the 20th.
It won't have to be an emergency meeting.
It won't. Thanks for putting that out there. Okay, so back to September, October. So, Dr. Martin, would you recommend that we skip the October 1st meeting? And then instead have it on the 8th, 15th, and 22nd? That would be swell. That's fine. All right, any other thoughts on dates? So we'll use this as a structure to set up the ADCD so that the decisions that we're about to talk on when it's time for the superintendent or the cabinet or the SAM to work on assigning specific agenda items to dates, we'll use this as a structure to have the specific dates. So what are we gonna do on during our meetings? So there's a number of charts that they're organized by topic area. We thought it would be better to do it that way than just going month by month through the ADC. So the first chart are all of the agenda items that the superintendent will be scheduling. These are related to the strategic plan, so they're the DISC-related items that were in the superintendent's goals or in the DISC plans, or were those focus topics that we shared earlier this year where we talked about carrying them over to 2024. And anything else you want to say about that, Superintendent?
Just that we will back map all of these things from things you need to make decisions on, with multiple opportunities to hear about the issue before you're asked to make a decision. And that's how, as you know, we did start times this year, we did budget this year, and we will replicate that approach. Other items here are more monitoring and continue to watch the work. So we will make sure that each of the decisions has, of course, as required, a prep for action, but I think almost always a study session. So it will be at least study session, prep for action, and probably with some of the biggies like the funding redesign work, more than that. So we will, once we kind of have the dates firm, which it sounds like close to, thanks in particular to the chair's good work, I will be back mapping that. The thing that's happening right now is I'm working with cabinet members around this table to really timeline out when we think the decisions need to be made. Not all of them will be 2024, it's looking like. Some of them will need to extend into 25, 26, because some of them will need time for community engagement and additional analysis. So some of my really ambitious plans are running into reality, but we'll be able to get this to you in the very near future with specific timelines, specific items on the calendar.
And I think there's a new terminology you're going to start hearing that the superintendent has shared that he's going to use for staff recruitment and induction, that it's now being referred to as the human capital strategy.
It's more than just who we recruit and how we help them induct. It's their job satisfaction, it's effectiveness, it's staff mental health, it's well-being of our employees. So human capital is kind of the economics term that I think captures it. So yes, that's become a broader strategy than when we did the strategic plan, which was really about recruitment and initial joining the district. As we've begun the planning of that initiative, it's become very clear that there's a whole continuum of support for people that needs to be realized.
Any other questions on these topics? They will be more than familiar to you over the next year.
I think that probably should have Madam Chair said, if I was going to step back and sort of summarize the way I think that I'm proposing this is going to work, rather than looking at individual school skip plans, which you have devoted an extraordinary amount of time to, and which we still have some more coming up in the coming weeks, The major focus for 2024 of your work will be the system change initiatives. In some cases, updates on the new ones, and in others, monitoring on the ones you've already heard about. It doesn't mean that if you wanted to continue to hear about an individual school skip plan or something like that, you couldn't do it, but that we are basically very close to having heard from almost all schools about their skips, and we would pivot in 2024 to district-wide initiatives. Now, we will still bring school personnel in to talk about those district-wide initiatives, but it would be someone from one of our school programs talking about family engagement or talking about MTSS, as opposed to what we've done, I think productively, but I think if we repeated it, it would just start to get kind of old. Like we'd be like, yep, we did that, we got it. And so now we'll be having the focus be the district-wide change, but we will continue to have the school program and community voice in those sessions. It won't just be people around this table who will be presenting.
And I think it's also important for board members to note that these skip plans will also be available on the individuals or either on the district side or individual school sites. So if you still want to get that detail that we might have gotten during the presentation, that'll be available.
And we'll still schedule a comprehensive update of what's in the skips for you that before the start of the school year that says here's what our schools are looking
at. All right. Okay, so let's move on to the next item that we're going to talk about, which are the action items that appear on our agenda, either consent or prep for action. There's a chart that is not in board docs that is for Lori's use. So we collected all of the consent agenda items from ABCD this year and identified those that are going to be recurring. So for example, there will be minutes on every meeting. There will be human resources actions. There's a series of financial items that appear regularly. So Lori's going to work with the appropriate candidate members on those recurring consent agenda items to make sure that they get scheduled. And then, of course, we have the policy 203.6 that identifies what items qualify to be on the consent agenda that we've been using. So, for example, we had approval of bids for the autonomous floor scrubbing robots on the consent agenda this year. Unless we're going to buy more floor scrubbing robots next year, we won't be seeing that item again, and you won't be seeing it on the draft ABCD. So that's one of the things that Ms. Sam is going to take care of scheduling. And now moving on to chart 2, titled Action Items, Consent or Prep for Action. If you look at the second page of that chart, there's a number of agenda items that are in white. And those are the standard or required agenda items that are either required by policy or they're required by statute. And those were scheduled on our ABCD last year, and they will be rescheduled on the ABCD for next year. There's 2 items that don't appear on your draft that we'll add. Somehow I missed enrollment projections. So I think we need to make sure that's on at least once annually, right? If not twice.
Depends. We should probably have a quick discussion about that.
Okay.
We intentionally chose not to bring it this year because we had done a pretty extensive projection the year before.
Okay.
I think there could be a difference between an enrollment projection and enrollment update. A projection would be we actually paid somebody to do a demographic study, but you should definitely get enrollment updates. And so we should have enrollment on there somewhere. It may or may not be an external projection that we do like we did last year, because that'd be kind of expensive, but for sure an enrollment update.
Great. And then the other item was the priorities for the upcoming legislative session. We have already added it to the 2023 school board calendar to be at our last meeting in December, but then we need an action item on it at our first meeting in January. So those are the 2 items, regular action items that weren't on this chart that we found since we put it in board docs. But the items that are in yellow are sort of ours for discussion. Not whether they're going to be on the calendar, but the board preferences for how and how many meetings. So the first one is on the budget. We had 6 dates on the budget this year. And I wanted the board just to have the opportunity to make any comments or suggestions or requests on how it went this year, and if there's anything you'd like to see differently next year, and also to give Mr. Carlson the opportunity to kind of look ahead and say, how might this year be different than last year in terms of the number of meetings we'll be. You'll remember that in January and February, we have a discussion of the parameters. And then we actually approved those budget reduction strategies before the staffing documents needed to be made and the conversations had to happen in the buildings. And then in mid-March, we had the budget update where we got an update as to how the budget was being developed following the staffing meetings, right, Mr. Carlson? And then we have a study session on the draft budget, and then our prep for action and action in June. So still a 6-meeting model for 2024?
I think I should inject. You know, I'm always supportive of cabinet members speaking up. In this instance, I think we want to hear from board members because John and I and John's team are very much in the midst of actually thinking through the staff side of this. And so we will respond to what you think will work for you on the budget piece. The hesitation is this year we are going to be concurrent with just doing the budget for 24-25, thinking through the funding redesign that is very complex and related but separate. And so having those two things fit together is something that we're really working on right now. And so I think this is what we landed on last year. I think from a staff perspective, broadly defined, this worked quite well. We felt like we had good principal direction from the board at the beginning of the year that gave us broad direction on the budget, you know, stick to the deficit reduction strategy, all the stuff we talked about. And we were able to use that as a through line. And I also felt that, as you know, whether it was Quarry Hill or whatever, you had multiple opportunities to raise questions as we got to the moment of decision, with enough time for us to respond and adapt the budget before we asked you to vote. So broadly stated, for the 2024-2025 budget, I think this works pretty well. We are going to have a new budget committee meeting this year, and we're going to be thinking about the long-term change work, and that's where we want to make sure that the two fit together. So we don't find ourselves in meetings saying, wait, are we talking about the 2024-2025 budget, or are we talking about the new formula for allocating the budgets? We want to make sure that fits for you, because they're both going to be happening concurrently.
I think personally, I appreciated this year that separate decision piece on the approval of the overall budget strategies, that we had that specific action item where we received the information and then we had a chance to actually vote to give you the direction, particularly with the budget reductions, that early in the process.
And as was the case last year, our labor contracts will be a huge factor that we're going to need to get direction from you on and factor into budget strategies. So that's one of those that is, until you give us that direction, we can't really build a budget. So it's not just a philosophical step. It's a very meaningful step that we keep going back to all the way down to the final spreadsheets so that it fits the big direction that we get.
So not direct report.
I found that breaking it into segments like that really helped reduce the stress of the decision, that we had information and that I felt was new looking at this side much earlier on. Terry, I just wanted to typographical correction of it, and then that question, I think the main period should be 2023.
Yes.
And then was
You'll find a few of those.
was that the study session? That's what I don't remember.
Yes. And that's the question that sort of remains, I think, for our May 2024 schedule, because I think it may very well be that Mr. Carlson looks at the schedule and says, yeah, we can't have a study session on May 21st, that's too soon. The legislature, it's not a budget year, but they may make they are able to make some decisions that may affect us fiscally, so I think there still has to be some conversation about whether that last meeting in May ends up being the 28th as opposed to the 21st. But yes. All right, so hearing no objection, we'll go with a similar structure and schedule for the budget. The next item is related to the superintendent evaluation and contract process and goals. So, just to give board members a sense, first of all, the structure that we have this year, we've already set it up for the superintendent goals next year to have similar structure. We have a leadership component and we have the student outcomes component. That leadership component evaluation really can't happen until July because the superintendent needs time following the end of the school year to write his own self-evaluation, and then the board needs time to complete whatever instrument we choose this year. That was the MSBA, and that's what's being recommended again for next year. And then the outcomes component evaluation would be 2 meetings in the fall, but it would be after the actual outcomes data is available. So in this case, it's happening after that November 21st study session when we get the grid data. We'll have a closed session that meeting after the grid data, and then we'll have the report of the outcomes evaluation at the next meeting. The superintendent goals are really limited to dates in August because the superintendent needs time after his evaluation to write his goals for the following year. And then in 2024, we have another consideration that we won't be making any decision or scheduling until after we have the conversation on the superintendent's leadership component in July, because the superintendent's contract expires on June 30th, 2025, and his contract states that beginning 365 days prior to the expiration date of an existing employment contract, the board may negotiate and enter into a subsequent employment contract to take effect upon the expiration of the existing contract. So in our case, that means theoretically the board could begin, if we were to choose contract negotiations with the superintendent on a new contract anytime after June 30th of 2024. And that would be a separate either agenda item or meeting, and we would have to talk about timing. But what has happened in the past is following the superintendent's evaluation in that summer time frame, that was when the board usually had a discussion about whether subsequent contract negotiations were to continue. So that, just wanted to put that on the board's radar. So any other comments on superintendent evaluation timing or process this year? I think we talked. It's pretty much, yes, Dr. Martin.
Just that I agree with that, I think it makes sense to do it sooner rather than later. And because we can't begin that decision, that discussion, almost a year ahead of time, it makes sense to do it right after the evaluation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that? Sure. Does that mean that it would be before the outcomes components?
You would have to make that decision as a board.
So the decision didn't happen in August, but it might be when we're gonna start.
Right. All right. We have the opportunity to start making that decision or start having that conversation anytime after that June 30th date. Yep. And then we can decide when to schedule it.
But yeah, the idea is to make sure we're holding some meetings and say, plan on an item right after the evaluation. Just leave thereafter.
During that meeting in July.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so then we have our school board evaluation goals. This year we did it in August. The question is, given all the other things we have to do in June, or July and August, does the board want to consider moving our process earlier? Maybe even right after the school year's out in July. It just would mean when we would have the timing of when we would individually take our tool and then have a conversation. But you'll see that I've added a new meeting, a new agenda item at the beginning of the evaluation process, given some of the comments from Dr. Barlow and some of the other board members on some of the questions in the tool that we weren't sure were best reflective of our work and how it really reflected on our work. People wanted to have a conversation about the tool that we were to use before we dive into that. So I don't know how board members feel about maybe moving this process to June.
The whole of it, or just?
Started in June instead of starting it in July. Because we can choose the tool in June, and maybe after the budget process is done, and then we can subsequently schedule the self-evaluation goal conversation or approval of our plans.
I wonder if we couldn't even, sooner than these months, have a short conversation about the tool, and maybe get a subcommittee tweak one and or whatever, and while it's still relatively fresh in our minds, we get about the tool, and it's really not administrative tool.
I mean, my reaction to the tool piece, it's not perfect, we have data on it from the last several years, so like, I think, in my mind, when I was saying we don't, every time we take it, we always have a discussion about, but what does this mean? And like, if we just have a conversation that says, we will all be in agreement that this question means this thing, then we can still use the same tool, we're just defining what, so we're all on the same page for those items.
And I think using the same tool makes for apples to apples comparison when you need to.
Right, so if we don't come up with like a perfect thing that we're gonna adopt for several years, we might as well stick with the same one and just get on the same page about what all of the items actually mean as we move forward.
And that's a meeting we can do, I think as Director Martin says, we can do that anytime, even 2023. And then we can schedule, it leaves us a 2-meeting process for the discussion and then the approval of the goals.
So let's create our own cipher for what the questions mean.
Yeah. Or to say, before I can answer this question, I need more information. Okay, so we'll look to add an agenda item on an existing meeting in 2023, and then maybe look for a June timeframe for the actual process. Is that good? All right. Okay, so the next item is the series of meetings we had this year regarding the monitoring of the school resource officer contract. We had multiple agenda items because there was a sort of a structured approach to looking at the contract this year. And the question is, how do we want to include agenda items related to monitoring of the contract in 2024? And the contract language says that the agreement will automatically renew unless either party provides written notice of termination to the other party on or before May 1st. So technically, no board action is required to renew the contract for a subsequent year, but we had a conversation about the contract, but we didn't take action one way or the other. And I think we had some board members who wanted to have a conversation about explicitly saying we're not going to take action to terminate the contract, or we are going to extend the contract. So this is sort of the time to talk about how we might want to structure that discussion, because it is a pretty tight time frame to make.
I think one thing I'd like to avoid is to extend the deadline for the contract like we did this year, because I think it really caused a lot of anxiety as to what was going on.
We did it 2 years ago.
Yeah, right. I mean, it might come to the point where we do have to do it, but I think we should maybe plan ahead that that we don't have to.
And I would say, yes, absolutely, being explicit about, even if we're choosing not to vote, to say that, because I think that felt a little bit shady to some people, like it's such a big deal, and we spent so much time on this, and then all of a sudden it was just like, we didn't talk about it, and now it's re-adopted.
And then you can,
Yeah.
So that will probably have to happen sometime in April. because the deadline of making a decision as outlined in the contract is May 1st.
I have one more point on that, as we approach this every year, I always get nervous, and I'm usually not overly cautious person. But I get nervous that the contract actually says that the police department could also cancel. And if that were to happen, and I think that we would hopefully have some indication that something's leading up to that. But I think there's value in having a conversation at some point on the agenda, kind of like a touch base, how is this going, so that we don't get into a situation where we have to then have an alternative on the fly. Because my concern is that if we realize that something's happening that wasn't going well in the next year, that we would need to give some direction, and we wouldn't want to wait. My suggestion, we wouldn't want to wait until April. So I always feel like April is too late in the game when the decision is.
Well, and we did have, the item that isn't on the chart was the presentation that we had, was it the 25th? No, the one we just had on the law enforcement, it was just last week. Yeah, that definitely was just last week. Where there was a lot of data on what actually happened. Unfortunately, for the timing of the contract renewal, that data wouldn't be available for the whole year. So the question is, how would the board, if at all, want to hear about sort of how the contract has gone up until the point where we would have information, because we have to make the decision before the year's over.
Well, to the point that Karen's making, Clayton, I can't think for Julie Clayton, we can certainly ask her to be the point person and her ear to the ground in terms of departmental shifting and or directional change. And I'm sure Superintendent Piquel, you probably on occasion may, as a courtesy, reach out and speak to the chief of police. And if you could probably just have that in your, index of things to do, to maybe mid-year or every whatever they are anticipating any change. Oftentimes their changes may be tied to budget cycles. So I don't think why make a mountain out of a molehill? I think that's an expression. So I think we have some internal mechanisms that can get us to the same place without trying to think we have to flood something to make sure that happens.
I had one other thought on this presentation, that it seemed like it was kind of two parts. One was how was the contract going, and one was the data. Could we split those into two mini presentations and how is the contract going before we have to decide what I mean, the expectations of the things that we put in the contract that we wanted them to do.
Because I feel like that wasn't actually happening in the presentation. You know what I mean? Like, it was like information, but there was just a miss about like, we're explicitly asking for this, and like, essentially, like, how are you justifying that we're paying you in this money?
And maybe that's the agenda items you and I talked about a little bit after the meeting, that it seemed like they made the list of what they needed to do to comply with the contract, and I know there were some things that, if I made that list, I would have made a different list of what I wanted to hear about and what I expected them to accomplish, and tell us about their work in that area.
So a decision would have to be made on the subsequent contract no later than the end of April. And then some sort of information being provided to the board on how the contract is being implemented next year would happen in March. I guess the question to ask is that time frame, the beginning of the school year of March, enough time not to have the data, because that's a year, but to have some of that. I know you were talking about the things that were in the charts about the data, about the presentations in the community and the things in the schools. Is that the kind of things you're talking about?
I mean, I
would agree with Karen that I think that my list of like, this is what we have in the MOU and how are you satisfying that, I think explicit would have been different than what they presented to us. Although the information was useful, but I felt like, thank you for telling us that you high five the students and like go to the meetings, but like there's other stuff and I'm like, what are you doing here?
I would just have to say, I would be eager for your specific examples of that. It would be very helpful to know, because we did track it exactly the components of the MOU. The degree to which those actions met the expectations of those components, I think is a very important question, but we did use the exact categories which Julie and Chris did. This is obviously something we'll be looking at on an ongoing basis. The purpose of this summer was an annual review of the data for the school year. We certainly could provide an interim report in February of year to date if that was helpful to the board in thinking about the contract renewal piece. But also, of course, you could look back at the previous year's data also as part of that decision. So you could say, well, here's what we saw in July, we'll look to the full school year, and now let's get an update and see year to date. I would agree the data on incidents needs a lot of improvement, for sure. I think the data on contract actions also needs, can be continuously improved. We did prepare that data, and we do need to work with RPD, as we talked about in Director Ralla first touched off this discussion, to align those two data sets. We're working with an external agency that I think wants to be responsive. I think the point Director Muffin and Director Ralla that you made about RPD providing notice is actually a very helpful one to be reminded. I'm very confident that would happen, but I think it's a good idea to systematize that, as you suggest, so that we would have notice as well, should something like that. As some of the new legislation is being understood, and the Attorney General just literally sitting here just issued an opinion on some of the requirements around criminal restraint. In other school districts, police departments are suggesting they're going to pull SROs as a result of that. I talked to the chief yesterday, and right now we are going to be waiting for some new guidance from the state, and that's not on the table in Rochester right now, but I agree with you. We need as much advance notice as I think this board has been eager to give, because you've always been pushing us productively to keep getting it earlier. So I really invite as much clarity as you can provide and as far in advance as you can provide of the kind of data that would be helpful to you, because we do need to continue to step up our game in providing that in the time frame we need.
But I think what I'm hearing is, as opposed to the 8 meetings that we had in 2023, we could probably accomplish it in 2, where one was a prep for action with whatever information on the implementation of the contract and any data on the law enforcement incidents, and then an action item specifically related to the contract for the subsequent year. One in March, one in April.
Yeah, let us take a look at that.
Okay.
I don't see a reason why not, but we want to make sure, we want to align this what RPD's timelines for sharing that data would be, and really get that tight.
But I guess it kind of directly, my thought is, could be immediate action, that some, it technically doesn't get worse than anything, that it may not be action.
Well, we could just, I think there was interest from at least some of the board members in having an affirmative decision point, and got to the regular meeting and we didn't want to take action on that.
Well, at least it goes from 8 to 2. So,
The other thing, just to state the obvious, is I agree it is 100% the board's role and authority to ask for updates, just as you are. The other thing is it's incumbent on us to tell you proactively if what's happening on the ground with our SROs is departing from the intent that you've articulated in the contract. So if we get into September or October and we are seeing things that are in conflict with the contract, it's our job to proactively say, we actually need to put this on the agenda because things are departing. So I'm not suggesting, I'm agreeing this should be on the agenda, but you should trust that you don't we need to have it on the agenda for us to feel it's our responsibility to share with you if something is changing. Because what would not work is if we got to March and then I said, you know, things started to go really bad in February, in October, but we didn't tell you. You know, so yes to two meetings, but you have my commitment to be informing you. I think I have a clear understanding of this board's intent, and that if we are seeing a departure from that intent, we would put it on the agenda when that's happened. We would not wait like. But yes, let's get it counted.
Again, hands-on action items before we move on to monitoring. So chart number 3 are monitoring items. Again, there's a list of white unhighlighted items that are standard. One of them is the SR data presentation, which is different than the contract. Summer Discovery report that we had tonight, et cetera. So those will be dates that Ms. Sam will work with Cabinet to schedule. There were 2 monitoring items on the 2023 agenda that are in yellow. And the question is, are those agenda items that we should carry over and have a monitoring item on them in 2024 for any reason, or not? The only reason I bring up the environmental science implementation is, isn't 2024 the first year that being implemented?
Madam Chair, I don't want to intervene in the middle of the board, but the answer to this is yes, it should be on.
Okay. I was hoping somebody would just speak up and say that. Good.
Yes, those standards will now, and we know that the READ Act is going to be a constant priority, so yeah, we should say that for sure.
Great. There are a few monitoring items that we found after we did this draft, and they all have to, one has to do with the human subjects research results and findings. One of the other exercises that we did was, we shared this with you last time when we initially put together the ABCD, is we went through all of our policies to identify what the board was required to review, approve, and we went to see that we were in compliance with all of those. And one of the things that we need to schedule is the human subjects research results and findings. We have a new policy that we wrote specifically for those studies or those research activities that people come to the district and say, I'd like to use students for research. And the requirement in policy says that once a year, those findings will be brought to the board and will be reported, as opposed to having individual reports like we have had in the past. So we just need to work with Director Fongo and Mr. Ruck. Yes,
that's only for the research studies that are done with actual people, not just the ones that use the district's data, or is it both? So we have a number of people who come in and just want to use the data.
Right. I think it's just humans.
It's just one actual.
Yeah, we haven't really had any just quantitative studies since I've been here, but I think we bring you both. I mean, part of the problem is that these results take years. So usually I think we would just say study in progress. But we need to schedule, I mentioned this to Dr. Obama and Dr. Long, but we need to schedule a session where we update you on. We did a study of the hockey players with taking the, it's not melatonin, but like whatever the hormone that they're taking, and we need to let you know if that's been published or if that's in progress. That was a Mayo one. And so we should at minimum tell you in progress results expected X, or here's the study results. And if somebody was doing just a quantitative study, like we did have Monique Davis, who presented on the SRO research, she does have an IRB to do a study of discipline rates and literacy rates in RPS. That's only going to be quantitative, reanalyzing our data. She hasn't started that yet because she's finishing her dissertation. So if that happened, that would actually be an example. And so I would think you'd be interested in that as well. So even though it's not human subjects, we can bring you up on it.
I think that when our district is a place where research is taking place, and we should have research taking place here, I think it's good to get brief updates on what's going on with the results.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Rather than just saying, go ahead and do it, but report, let us know.
It seems to me that it hasn't been a while since we've had fun talks, but we always seem to ask that question and then never close that.
Just candidly, very often researchers don't tell us. But They just they go publish somewhere and study it, they don't necessarily do it. We haven't had that many, but I think we need to tighten that protocol and say a precondition of getting research approval is that you will report, provide progress reports on the progress of your study and then findings as soon as it's published. And so we should build that in. I think they'll be glad to do it. They just get busy and they're focused on their research.
And this is the first year of implementation of this policy.
Yeah.
So. Okay, the other items that we are going to need to add are all related to updates from our committees that are in our policy and committees. So adding an update from the Community Education Advisory Council and the Community Budget Advisory Committee. And we're still looking into the Special Education Advisory Council. But we'll have those as agenda items on the work with those committees. Okay, so that's monitoring. Any other? Right, so the next are the focus topics. So remember, we used the focus topics this year for a lot of the strategic plan, information sharing. If you look at the focus topics in red, that's a reflection of the process that we went through when we were first making the ABCD, or topics that the board members wanted to hear information on. They weren't necessarily related to a decision that was being made. But, for example, the process for identifying students with special education services tonight is an example. There are a few items that were included in focus topics this year, those are in yellow, that the question is, should they be included as a monitoring item in 2024? So, for example, the school continuous plan overview was the presentation on the SCIPs for this coming school year, what the areas were that the schools could choose, what areas the schools chose, et cetera. Hearing the superintendent that that's a yes, it's going to be an annual item. But the second, grading procedures update. The superintendent has told us over the past year about the process of developing new grading procedures and announced them for this year. Is that something that the board would like an update on at some point in 2024 of the implementation, and there would be a monitoring of that procedures?
Well, I thought the superintendent already indicated that he's going to do it when that information was presented a couple weeks ago. So I guess if you're asking, should the board request it, he's already said he's going to provide it.
But we would have the option of saying, well, maybe he wants to provide it, we don't want to see it, which is not where I'm at at all. But I agree.
And then the RPS equity policy implementation update, we're going to have one of those for the first time on September 12th. The policy itself requires the board to review the equity policy annually, and we haven't done that yet as a group. But because it's really one of the most unique policies in our whole policy work, it's what we're going to do together, as opposed to something that's going to go through the policy committee and have recommendations. So I put that in there as a placeholder, as something that we would like to consider to continue to do annually, and not part separately of our policy work.
Well, one thing I might suggest, Madam Chair, is that the ball is now, as you can all tell, Kathy and Lori have done unbelievable work to get it to this point. The ball is now in my court to populate this calendar and then get it back to you for reaction, which we'll do electronically. If there are particular ones here or other issues, like I think Justin was you that suggested the special ed update we had to make, let me know and we will fill them in. If there are not ones, I will, as I did in 2023, use my sense of what I want to make sure is on your radar screen and putting the issue there. So yes, you're right, I think you should be kept updated on the grading policy. We'll come back to you, let you know how it's going. So I'll build that in. And I think this is an invaluable look back at where we are. What's most useful to me is what is of interest to you, either individually or collectively. Clearly, we have the message loud and clear about SROs, and we'll build that prominently in, and there are other things, and that's invaluable. And if it doesn't come in your mind right now, I think over the next week, let me know, and we'll be glad to put it on account.
Okay, so those are the focus topics. And then the last are the info and outreach agenda items. So again, we have a whole series of ones that are not highlighted that will regularly appear on our info and outreach. There are board member committee updates, the Rochester Public School Foundation reports, our recognitions where we're recognizing our various employee groups, and then our student athletics activities and academic recognitions, and Project Search has become a standard on our agenda. We've had a back to school update every year. And then for the first time this year, we're going to have a county and city update. So I wanted to make sure we documented that. We've noticed that some full board feedback after those presentations in October as to whether that's something we want to continue annually. Then there's only one item that was a monitoring item, was a info and outreach item, updates from American Indian Education. But the question I have is whether we want to have that as an annual item, separate from the APAC APAC non/concurrence letter, or if that was a once this year under these circumstances. I don't know.
We should talk to Amelia and talk about that. You need the update. The question is just, do you get it when you get the APAC recommendation, or do you get it at a separate time? You can see an argument for both.
Great. And then two items that we came up after we did the draft was a discussion of School Board Academy for 2024 and an annual report from an annual information and outreach item from Cradle to Career. And I think what you said about the focus topic also applies to information and outreach. So if there's something, I think one of the things we're trying to do is to get a little tighter on our definition of how we use these categories. Monitoring, we're trying to relate to the work of the board, either a past decision or a future decision, but one that might not be on the table. That's really what that for action and action is. And information and outreach is information we want to share with the community celebrating veterans. And that is all, board members, unless anybody has any other comments. Tonight, you can plan your schedule for topics for the next year.
Is the district providing some information sharing to the county and the city also?
Seems like there's so many. We were going to be convening you and the city council and the county commissioners, and then that sort of collapsed by mutual agreement. And this is the placeholder. So I'm going to be updating the city council and the commissioner and Allison and Heidi. It's a trial.
Can you send us a date for when you're running?
Lori, can we help send them the dates when I'm going there? Yes, absolutely. It's on the calendar somewhere. I'd be glad to. The county, frankly, has been hard to schedule because they keep scheduling it and then moving it. So we need that date for something else. So that's been a moving target, and I think it's on schedule. The city council's been, yeah, glad.
Right, item 6.1, I don't think, Jean, sorry.
Quick question. And you have it on here, when we do recognition for student athletes and student activities, are we to get that on here like 2 or 3 times during the year?
Spaced out.
Spaced out.
So there's the athletic scheduling that sort of has to go by the season, and then the academics and the activities.
It's kind of like season 2. But I don't know, I guess one question for you all that I had to react to now or think about, this past year we split them up. So it wasn't like theater coming with athletics. Minus the fact that one 5th grade kid's spelling lesson was highlighted as a district-wide priority because the teacher just nominated it. I love that actually. It was like just in our class. There was one kid came down to the school board. I was like, wow, the kid won for the whole district. Like, no, just in our class. That was kind of cool.
Oh, what a thrill for them.
Wasn't it cool? But I mean, we can't get a every 5th grade class. So I'm a little bit conflicted on the merits of separating the two. One of our challenges, and this is actually a deeper issue, to what extent do our activities directors primarily see themselves as athletic directors, and how connected are they to the arts, to government, to leadership? I mean, the title is activities directors, but we know that there's just a lot of history and a ton of work on the athletic side. So the idea of separating them was to uplift the other content, and I think it's in good moments, but it also was tough to get kids to come. So if you have thoughts about the merits, we definitely want to continue to bring both to you, but it's a question of combining them, separating them.
Well, there's that, and I remember the one meeting we had, fun hours with, I think, recognitions, and the kids were great, but, after a certain point,
Yep.
it's a crowd control issue, and just too
Yeah.
much time.
I think when we do that with students, and to an extent parents and caregivers too, but especially students, we want to make it meaningful for them. So I have been trying to think, how do we have it so it's not too long, it doesn't seem disorganized, and even I've talked with Mom Sue about having our picture taking be really crisp, and she's amazing at it. We've never really asked her to do it in a school board meeting where it's it's not just, hey, turn around, but it's really, we got your picture, so we'll give that some thought for this year.
Okay, so for item 6.1, I'm not going to ask you about any items from ABC, because I just did. There were no questions prior to the meeting on tonight's agenda items. Our next meeting is September 5th at 5:30, regular meeting. Then September 12th at 5, a study session. September 19th at 5:30, regular meeting. And October 3rd at 5:30, a regular meeting. And hearing no other business, this meeting is adjourned at 8:16 p.m.